Welcome to the Catella Bubble. Me and Teddy here, ready to give you the final part of Spare. So to start off today, we are in the middle of part 3 of Prince Harry's Spare. I got my copy right here. It's all marked up and I am ready to dive in. The rest of part 3 is an entire documentation of everything that happened from Harry proposing to Meghan, asking her to be a part of this mess, to them getting married, making her an official part of the royal family, and then all of the aftermath after she became an official part, where the family just started to lose all sense of reality because they could not find a way to welcome and bring Meghan in a positive way. We saw last episode, they clearly had been laying a lot of the groundwork to discourage Harry from even marrying Meghan in the first place. It seems like they might have done that with anybody that he tried to marry, just based on the whole like competition aspect between like couples in the royal family as well. I think that they didn't want him to get married in general, but they especially made clear that they didn't want him to marry Meghan, and I wonder why. Like I said in my last video, this part 3, I feel like we don't get a lot of good anecdotes of like particular scenes that happened at this time, but we do get a lot of summary of like the inner office politics that were kind of going behind the scenes and the sort of power plays that were at hand that caused Harry to sort of wake up and realize that nobody was really taking Harry and Meghan seriously or had their best interests at heart, and were instead focused on their own Machiavellian power plays throughout the whole thing so that they wouldn't get in trouble or they wouldn't have issues with the press. So the royal family essentially set up a hostile work environment for one of its own members, where they sort of tacitly accepted that Meghan was allowed to be put under this like ginormous microscope of the press in order to keep everybody else looking positive in comparison. We also start to see how, as they try to exert more and more control over their own lives and their own situation, suddenly when they're trying to like protect their own lives, the family starts to have none of that, because in their minds, Harry is the spare. Harry's role is to sit down, shut up, do as you're told, keep yourself quiet, and put up with all of the abuse that makes us look better because we are meant to be the ones that have the power. At this point, the Queen is alive, so the Queen has to maintain that sort of authority. Prince Charles, as the future king, needs to have that authority. Prince William, as the heir after him, needs to maintain that authority. And so who in all of this gets the shaft? It's going to be the spare. Harry realizes this ain't no way to live. Living to serve the interests of other people when it actively harms yourselves and your family and the people that you love is no way to live. Him and Meghan start to plan more ways to exert control over their own lives and to make some sort of escape out of this toxic relationship with the press. The family starts to get angry at this because by Harry and Meghan not playing nice with the press, they feel like the press will negatively react to the family as a whole. So in order to stop them at all costs, the royal family decides to go down the route of, let's do Diana again. Let's do the same thing that we did to Diana and do it again. And this is the part where it starts to become a little bit of a, what is the royal family wanting or hoping to get out of this situation? I think that the royal family members themselves don't think about the reality of the situation because the bubble that they all live in contains so much information and misinformation that the reality that they're in it's like a parallel universe. So I don't think that when they are taking these actions, like denying Harry and Meghan's security, I don't think that they're like, that means that Harry and Meghan could more easily be killed. But it also shows that the whole situation is so messed up and they're so focused on the appearance of a story that paints them in a good light that they don't actually stop to question their own morals and do the right thing. They're so conditioned now. If the media narrative is positive, then what we are doing is good. It's a mess. I honestly think that the members of the family are bad people because they made these decisions, but are also like brainwashed to all hell. But this story generally has a happy ending. It sounds like Harry and Meghan, after this entire ordeal, after asserting their boundaries, after doing what they can to take back the control that they should have over themselves and exert that freedom, they become happier, healthier people that can grow together as a family, support each other, and do good in the world. And ain't that a happy story? So without further ado, let's get into it. We need to finish up. Spoilers. Spoilers. Let's pick up at chapter 34. So last chapter, Harry was able to ask the Queen to get permission to propose to Meghan. Now that he has gotten that permission, he is like, we cannot waste any time. Let me propose to Meghan like soon before there's any more sorts of like hoops I have to jump through. He asked William if he could use a bracelet to get stones out of to make Meghan's ring. He makes a note here. He says he seemed to like Meg. Despite his off-sided concerns, Kate seemed to like her too. They don't seem to have any sort of like problem with her on a person-to-person level. Where are all the problems coming from? That's hard to say. Is it the race issue? Is it the press coverage issue? Is it the spotlight being stolen? Is it the fact that Harry is just like not putting up with bullshit anymore? Or is it a combination of all of those things that are causing William to react in that way? We don't know. But as far as Harry has reiterated throughout the book, William doesn't have any personal issue with Meghan. Neither does Kate, at least at this part. Okay, at least at this part. We'll get into it later. Chapter 35, Meghan has to start wrapping up her whole life, right? At this point in time, she's still on Suits. She's still living in Toronto, but she's clearly starting to sort of wrap all of those things up and figure out how they're going to make this work so that she can move over there because she has no other option. If she's going to marry Harry, being royal is going to be her full-time job. At the beginning of the chapter, Harry makes a note that the writers of Suits were starting to become frustrated because the palace was constantly intervening with their writing process when writing dialogue for Meghan. I've never watched Suits, so I don't know enough of the ins and outs about her character or anything, but the way that the palace tries to control every little aspect, why? Their whole job just becomes about media instead of about helping the world. Meghan has to start packing up things at her house. She has to say goodbye to one of her dogs who just can't travel with them. She has to shut down the TIG, her website. She has to start closing down all of her social media accounts. Meghan finally makes it to the UK and Harry proposes to her out in the back garden with their dog present, who is in cast because he broke his legs. And Meghan says yes.
Oh my god, Jess, it's happening. Oh my god, he told me not to peek. Oh my god.
What position were you in?
Downward dog.
That was good. It's very clever. You see, he's funny.
Of course I got down on one knee. Of course I did.
He was down on one knee and I was just like, yes, you're so joyful and excited. It's like, oh, we're doing this.
Chapter 36 starts to talk a little bit about Meghan's father. Now, Harry says that Thomas Markle is a bit of a complicated man. So Meghan actually lived with her father for a significant amount of her life growing up. It wasn't like she was distant from her father when her parents divorced. But Thomas Markle started to become a little bit of an odd character. He sort of ran off to like a border town in Mexico to just like spend the rest of his life. It seems like he's one of those guys that just doesn't really take care of himself, seems to just like have sort of bad habits and like odd quirks. I think especially like mentally, I can't speak to his mental health, but the little bits and pieces from here make it sound like he's mentally like maybe just like not all there, or that he has a lot of issues with that, but I can't speculate. But because of all of these issues, Meghan is like really concerned about her father, because the whole like psychological pressure that the press puts on you, especially these tabloids that are going after like Meghan's family, her friends, hounding these people to get little tidbits about Meghan's personal life, that causes a lot of like psychological strain. Meghan just didn't think that like he would be able to like withstand all of that. But finally a tabloid finds his location and starts hounding him. And when they're not hounding him, they're offering him gifts and loads of money in exchange for dirt on Meghan Markle. But because the press finds him to be an interesting character in his own right, you know, the whole like Meghan Markle's father is like a kind of eccentric man that lives in a border town in Mexico, I think he became a very obvious target for all of their harassment, because he just seemed very bullyable, for lack of a better term. So the chapter basically ends with Meghan telling her father, pleading with her father, just please ignore them, ignore the paparazzi, don't give them what they want, don't talk to them. The ominous line to end the chapter is, that's what the palace says to do. Meghan at this point is, again, she's trying to always do what the palace is saying that she should do. She's following all the advice that she is getting from the palace at this point. This is before they really start to question the advice that they're getting and come to their own conclusions about what actions they need to take. At this point, they're very willing to go along with what the palace is saying to them, which I think is interesting when the narrative started to become this whole like Duchess difficult sort of spin. It seems like Meghan was trying to do everything that they were asking her to do, and having them okay her scripts, okay her clothes, okay her statements, deleting her social media, deleting her account, not commenting to paparazzi, here's how you handle it. She's trying to do everything right. So this is not Meghan came in and was saying, I want to do things my way, I'm not going to listen to your advice. She's constantly trying her best to follow that advice, but even when she follows that advice, bad things occasionally come for it, and then the palace doesn't want to support her. Chapter 37 starts with an interesting quote. It opens with, "It was hard for both of us while dealing with all that being Meghan's father, to focus on the 1,000,001 details of planning a royal wedding. Strangely, the palace had trouble focusing too." Little conspiracy brained there. I get the sentiment. Nobody seemed to be really psyched about this wedding. Maybe Harry got the sense that people were dragging their feet on certain choices or planning certain parts of it. Maybe they were hoping that somehow all of it would go away. Why they would think that, I don't know. But it seems like every step of the way to Harry and Meghan becoming married and becoming a part of the family, there's all this hesitancy as if they think something is going to change the situation. But if Harry and Meghan are set on marrying each other, then nothing within the two of them is going to change their minds on that, which leads to this idea of, were people at the palace thinking that some sort of other external forces at play were going to halt this marriage or halt this relationship in any way? And why did they think that was going to happen? He mentions that the palace didn't seem to be able to get back to them on a date, didn't seem to be able to get back to them on a venue. He called Willie to talk about potential venues, and they have this exchange. I told him we were thinking of Westminster Abbey. No good. We did it there. Right. St. Paul's? $2,000. Plus Pa and Mummy did it there. Yes, good point. He suggested Tetbury. I snorted. Tetbury? The chapel near Highgrove? Seriously, Willie? How many does that place sit? Isn't that what you wanted? A small, quiet wedding? In fact, we wanted to elope. Barefoot in Botswana with maybe a friend officiating. That was our dream. But we were expected to share this moment with other people. It wasn't up to us. There's a lot to unpack with that exchange. Every step of the way, there's this downplaying and trying to make it seem like Meghan and Harry are sort of like unwelcome in this getting married idea. William telling Harry, like, go get married in this like tiny chapel that nobody has ever heard of, when Harry is literally his brother. And he got married in Westminster Abbey, which is like beautiful and grand and amazing. And he would just like dismiss that idea because him and Kate got married there and he doesn't want Harry to share in that in any way. It's not familial. It's not a familial relationship. It's all competition. And then to make a dig and say, like, go have this like small quiet wedding instead, like, isn't that what you want? I get the feeling that they only really want a small wedding because they're sensing all of this hostility from not only the family, but also a public that is now being like brainwashed by the press into being racist against Meghan. I think Harry also mentions a great point that there is this expectation from him that he needs to share the wedding with the world, because that is what the family has now based their entire branding on, is the branding of a fairy tale. The family knows full well that once they started publicizing these types of ceremonies and events, like coronations, weddings, funerals, and trying to invite the British public in and sell them in on this beautiful fairy tale of being a princess, that is what keeps the monarchy alive. The idea that every so often they're gonna get a day off from work and get to drink at a block party to celebrate a royal wedding.
Trade unionists and businessmen in the Abbey.
If you want to stay on the throne, yes.
In a trimmed-down, televised coronation.
If you want to avoid a revolution, yes, you forget. I have seen firsthand what it is like for a royal family to be overthrown because they're out of step with the people. I left Greece in an orange crate. My father would have been killed. My grandfather was. I'm just trying to protect you.
From whom? The British people? You have no idea who they are or what they want.
Oh, I'm just Johnny Foreigner again, who doesn't understand. Fine. You want a big, overblown ceremony costing a fortune while the rest of the country is on rations? Have it. But don't come bleating to me when your head and the heads of our children are on spikes.
If the people are hungry, they want something that lifts them up.
And how do you propose lifting them if they cannot see it?
People look to the monarchy for something bigger than themselves, an inspiration, a higher ideal. If you put it in their homes, allow them to watch it with their dinner on their laps.
Democratize it. Make them feel that they share in it. Understand it.
All right.
For William to try to play it that Harry should have this like low-key event when that's clearly not what the royal family has been marketing themselves as doing for like the past 40, 50 years. It's not logical. The only logic in it would be the family, again, just doesn't want to be inviting to Meghan. Chapter 38. The Fab Foursome, which is the new name for the two couples, the William and Kate, Harry and Meghan alliance. The Fab Four are off to the Royal Foundation Forum. Here's where the trouble starts in full force. The press picks up on this event, and I think there's a number of things that they pick up on, but one of the things that the press kind of runs with is that Meghan Markle is a normal person, but she's also a fierce advocate. And as a normal person that is a fierce advocate for, women's rights and global issues, Meghan came into this discussion really wanting to be topical and to really talk about solutions to problems in the world, right? Meghan mentions you know, the Me Too movement. This is in 2018. So to Meghan, this was pretty reasonable to, when you're talking about like feminism, be like, yeah, we should support hashtag Me Too because we should support victims of SA, basically. Nothing controversial, nothing that any other random celebrity would say to support like some general cause of some kind. But because of that, that makes the silence of the royal family on real issues stand out massively.
It's well known you've championed the empowerment of women and young girls and promoting their self-worth. How do you hope to continue that work with the Royal Foundation?
Women don't need to find a voice. They have a voice, they need to feel empowered to use it, and people need to be encouraged to listen. And I think right now in the climate that we're seeing with so many campaigns, I mean, with Me Too, there is no better time than to really continue to shine a light on women feeling empowered and people really helping to support them.
This is the first time that we've heard anyone associated with the royal family talking about those campaigns. Kate, for example, didn't wear black to the BAFTAs, and Camilla, who also supports women's organisations, hasn't mentioned Me Too or Time's Up.
This leads to a very good question. Why does the royal family not talk about any real issues going on in the world? Here's a list of reasons, okay? 1, their base is a very conservative base. Because the concept of monarchy is so archaic, the only people that are going to be like full force monarchists are going to have archaic beliefs. There's just no possible way around that. So just like any other like politician in a way, the royal family has to court that base through the media. And with that base leaning so conservative, we're starting to get to a point where it's conservative to the point where it is anti-progressivism. It's Trumpian. The people that they need to court are going to be so reactionary as to be Trumpian. So any mention of any like quote unquote like woke issues, it's gonna get them blowback from their most hardcore fan base. So you can't mention Me Too. You can't talk about like feminism, right? You can, as a royal family member, support all sorts of like good issues that are like meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Animal rights, homeopathy. I mean, homeopathy is actually like pretty dangerous. That's pretty controversial.
By definition, I begin, alternative medicine, I continue, has either not been proved to work or been proved not to work. Do you know what they call alternative medicine that's been proved to work? Medicine.
But apparently you're allowed to be pro-homeopathy because apparently it doesn't upset that base to be pro-homeopathy. But you can't be too woke. You can't be somebody that's actually sitting there and being like, systemic racism is real. 2, the monarchy is only really allowed to exist because the public has been conditioned into believing something that's not true, which is this idea that the monarchy these days has no connection to government. I don't know how to tell you this, Brits. I don't know how to break this to you, but the monarchy is a part of the government. That's what a monarchy is. If you don't want them to have any power or influence in the government, you shouldn't give them any government roles like king. But the public has been fed this narrative that the monarchy has no connection to government, and the way that they're allowed to keep up this illusion is that the monarchy has to project this sense of political impartiality. And so the way that the monarchy goes about that is to say, well, we don't want to comment on anything that is too controversial. We don't want to get involved in things that seem quote unquote too political. Now, there's a few things wrong with that. 1, we have lots of evidence now that the royal family has used its power to lobby the government. That's what the Black Spider memos were all about.
And after a decade-long secrecy battle, letters that Prince Charles wrote to government ministers in 2004 and 2005 have now been released.
That's right, these are the so-called Black Spider memos. They were released yesterday, as you said, after this 10-year legal battle, a legal battle that cost taxpayers £400,000. You can see the front page of The Independent here, the unacceptable face of the monarchy, how the Prince of Wales tried to influence ministers. I'll explain this very weird picture on the front page of The Independent in just a little bit, but according to The Independent, these letters really reveal the extent of royal meddling. The Prince Charles put direct pressure on ministers to change government policy on the bias of his own personal beliefs, according to The Independent.
The letters are less innocuous than a royal rant, in a tone more politely persuasive than overly demanding, like his letter to then Prime Minister Tony Blair during the Iraq War about under-equipped troops. I fear that this is just one more example of where our armed forces are being asked to do an extremely challenging job, particularly in Iraq, without the necessary resources. Others range from the scourge of badgers to the plight of the albatross to, well, the toothfish. To the Environment Minister, I particularly hope that the illegal fishing of the Patagonian toothfish will be high on your list of priorities.
2, everything is political. Every choice that you make, every opinion that you express is political. So yes, even though like animal rights activism doesn't seem quote unquote political, it's political, right? But the royal family gets to decide what causes are considered political. And the causes that they seem to have decided are quote unquote too political is anything that is not conservative. And that's a problem, because if you get to decide that supporting anything vaguely progressive is political, then you are supporting conservatives, and therefore you have chosen a political side, right? Like, then you're just conservatives. You're just conservatives that live in a crazy expensive house like every other conservative. So this leads to a big problem, right? Meghan coming in and being a human being that wants to support justice. The concept of justice is sort of too progressive of an idea for the royal family to support, while also marketing to that base, like the Britain First base. MAGA for British people. Little Englanders. Like, it's too much. So with this in mind, Meg talking about Me Too becomes a political step too far. And on top of that, it becomes a way to create a rift between female family members where there isn't any, because that is what the press feeds off. That's where drama comes from. By Kate not making those types of overtly political statements, that creates a possible catalyst for Kate and Meg to be compared to each other, which was going to happen anyway, because that's how tabloids work. But this becomes like the first glimpse that they are going to start being actively compared by the media. And then there's some petty shit about lip gloss. I have no interest in getting into that. Chapter 39, weddings going ahead. Harry and Meghan continuously working on everything leading up to the royal wedding. Meghan gets married off on suits so that she can make an exit. And then Harry starts to note that the press on them is starting to change a little bit. He says, quote, "That spring, however, the press was quieter, keener about breaking news of wedding details than inventing new libels. Each day there was another world exclusive about the flowers, the music, the food, the cake. No detail too small, not even the portaloos. It was reported that we'd be providing the poshest portaloos on earth, porcelain basins, gold-plated seats, after being inspired by one at Pippa Middleton's wedding. In reality, we didn't notice anything different about how or where people went pee or poo at Pippa's, and we had nothing to do with choosing the portaloos of ours. But we sincerely hoped that everyone would be able to do their thing in comfort and peace. Above all, we hoped the royal correspondents would continue to write about poo instead of trying to stir it up. So when the palace encouraged us to feed more wedding details to those correspondents, known as the Royal Rota, we obeyed. At the same time, I told the palace that on the big day, the happiest day of our lives, I didn't want to see one single royal correspondent inside that chapel unless Murdoch himself apologized for phone hacking. The palace scoffed. It would be an all-out war, the courtiers warned, to bar the royal rota from the wedding. Then let's go to war. Interesting. Let's talk about the conflicting information that Harry is getting about how much the palace can get involved in the reporting on him and Meghan. When Harry wants to approach the palace about like condemning racism, the palace seems to be like, there's nothing we can really do. There's nothing here. Let me check my notes. Sorry. When it comes to the royal wedding, the palace starts to become all, hey, you know what? Like, we actually have this thing where we can like leak things to the royal rota and like give them all these like juicy bits of gossip about the wedding. And then they just get to enjoy all of that like fun gossipy stuff about like a cute wedding for a princess. Now let's ask, why does that suddenly become something that everybody can get behind in their interactions with the press? I'll give you like a minute to think about it, okay? JK, you don't need a minute. The reason why is because a royal wedding is in the entire monarchy's interest. The monarchy only exists because occasionally they can placate the public with bread and circuses of a royal wedding and prey on women reading gossipy tabloids, getting all psyched up about the wedding to feed into their image of what royal life is like and play into this fantasy world of being a pretty princess. That's the only thing that the monarchy can focus their attention on. It's not even on planning the wedding. Like we said, they seem to be really hesitant about the concept of even like Harry and Meghan. But the one thing they're willing to get on, give them those sweet, juicy deets about the wedding, because that shit gets papers flying off the shelves. But when Harry starts to talk about the royal rota, that's when they start going all into the whole, oh, that's an all-out war. Don't actually care what Harry wants for his own wedding. They don't care about who he actually wants to be present in this moment where they are celebrating their love. They don't care about that. They don't care about what he actually wants out of that wedding and the moment that he wants to create. But they're really interested in marketing that story, marketing the wedding itself. I think it speaks to something that's just really callous and horrible about the media machine of the firm, that they can put so much energy into leaking and planting stories with their press confidants about flowers and portaloos for the wedding, but don't seem to have any energy to leak and plant stories that are like anti-racist. Like they don't seem to want to put in any effort to like condemn racism or condemn any of the abuse that Meghan is suffering. No, that's not worth it to them. They don't care about Meghan because frankly, they don't want Meghan in the monarchy. It leads to all sorts of questions that they have to ask about the future of the monarchy. And they know that the monarchy has no future because monarchy is morally wrong. So they would rather Meghan just be gone out of that discussion. What they need to focus on now is selling the concept of monarchy to the public to get those sweet, sweet taxpayer dollars. Also, this note that Harry says that he wants an apology for phone hacking. This throwaway line when I first read the book suddenly has a whole new meaning now with the lawsuits that Harry and many others are filing against various British media entities. Because later on in his statements in court, Harry basically says that there was a secret agreement that was kind of made behind the scenes. They were going to get a formal apology for the phone hacking in exchange essentially for not bringing about the lawsuits at times that would be maybe inconvenient for both parties. And then the media basically told them to go fuck themselves and that they weren't going to get an apology. Harry thought, that's a bit messed up. You promised us that we were going to get a formal apology for phone hacking. Also slots in nicely with the information that William took a basically £1 million deal to not push this any further. This scene has like a whole new meaning when you consider that Harry is like, hey, I don't want these people to be at my wedding because they literally are refusing to apologize to me for phone hacking, and my family is apparently okay with that because they are taking secret dealings with the press to make the whole thing just go away. That was probably the point where Harry is like, wow, what? My family has like no moral spine. Chapter 40, they are deciding on the music for their wedding. Harry and Meghan are visiting Charles. Meghan and Charles bond over their love of Chopin. Harry uses this moment to continue to make the point that Meghan and Charles are actually very similar personalities in terms of their interests, the things that they care about, their loves, the music that they enjoy, and that they had a very good bond, which again leads me to believe I don't think that the other royal family members are monsters. I think that they are normal people that have a lot of positive qualities to them that seem to be able to see positive qualities in Meghan. But the institution as a whole is so abusive. And there's abuse coming from like so many different ways, so many different situations. I think it really does corrupt the minds of the other royals. They go into this self-preservation mode where they are actively doing things that are harmful and destructive to their family in order to protect this nebulous idea of the family. And that idea is monarchy. Now, being part of the monarchy, their whole life, they've been conditioned to support it. By any means necessary, the monarchy must continue. And that's a pretty hard ask to put on people in the 21st century when they are an anachronism. It becomes a sacrifice for this greater good, and the greater good is monarchy itself. And when you think about a whole group of people that fight for some sort of greater good, even when all of the actions that they take seem to be actively hurtful and painful for themselves and others, that sounds like a cult. And so that's why I think I have a lot of sympathy for the royals in general. This is a side note here. We're going to go on a bit of a crazy tangent. I watch a lot of YouTube content about people that have left cults. I've never had any experience being in a cult necessarily. Actually, I take that back. I've had a brief encounter with a semi-cultish environment in my life, but that's a story for another day. But I've never been an active part of a cult or any sort of high-demand religion. Something that I get fascinated by and I watch a lot of content on. Specifically, my two guilty pleasures are Mormons and Scientologists. Sorry if you're either of those things. I'm not saying you can't be. I'm just saying there's people that have left, you know? And one of the things that people that I hear when they talk about their experiences leaving those types of high demand religions is this idea of deconstruction. You have to deconstruct everything that you've ever been taught, everything that you've kind of condition yourself to do in response to all of those things. Once one thing sort of unravels for you, you start to question all of these other things, and all of these other things to lead to more questions, and then you start to deconstruct the reality that was kind of placed upon you by the religion.
Deconstruction is deciding for yourself if the things you were taught is really the truth you believe in, and if it's not, what would it look like? Do you even believe in God?
Hey, I'm Heather, and I was raised in this cult.
Deconstructing is an exhausting process. All of this stuff that you believed just got turned upside down, and now your thinking is all new now.
Just think about everything that you know about Scientology, and just imagine that you didn't learn that as an adult. You grew up in it, you were raised in it, and you were conditioned to believe it was okay. And now take that and think about monarchy and the royal family. Monarchy, the concept of monarchy, is the sort of high demand religion aspect of it. The royal family members are the people that have been raised, literally raised from birth, to be conditioned into thinking what is of utmost importance is that sacrifice of yourself for the greater good, and the greater good is the high demand religion, which is monarchy. Holy crap, I'm off on a tangent. We're on chapter 40. God damn it. Okay, chapter 41. Harry is a bearded man at this point, yet for his wedding, because he is getting married in an army uniform, there's a lot of chitter-chatter as to whether Harry is allowed to keep his beard on his wedding day. Because I guess this can't be sorted, Harry is required to ask his grandmother. It feels to him like it's a part of him. He doesn't want to get rid of it. He shouldn't have to. It's his own face. So Harry is able to strike a deal with his grandma. Grandma says, that's fine. You can keep the beard. William starts lurking around. William basically tells Harry, no, you can't keep your beard. That's against protocol. Harry's like, excuse you, but I happen to know that the Queen says that it's okay. That's the big problem with this whole like monarchy thing. If you can convince the Queen to say, yeah, it's okay, then it kind of becomes okay. That's how a monarchy works. But of course, this makes William absolutely incandescent with rage, as they would say in the papers. Let's read the exchange. You went to ask her? Yes. And what did Granny say? She said, keep the beard. You put her in an uncomfortable position, Harold. She had no choice but to say yes. No choice? She's the Queen. If she didn't want me to have a beard, I think she can speak for herself. But Willie thought Granny had a soft spot for me, that she indulged me while holding him to an impossibly high standard. Because heir, spare, etc. It irked him. Blame the system, William. Not the brother. You're the heir because monarchy makes no sense. Yes, your family is grooming you to impossibly high standards because that's what the monarchy does. But just because they have enforced a sort of golden child scapegoat dynamic on you and your brother doesn't make it your brother's fault. Fight the real enemy, as Sinead O'Connor once said.
Fight the real enemy.
That was in reference to the Pope, but let's like imagine that was a picture of like King Charles or something. All right. The argument went on in person on the phone for more than a week. He wouldn't let it go. This starts to become a running theme in the second half of part 3, where William seems to be able to just have long, drawn-out arguments with Harry. Just constant back and forth between them whenever Harry tries to exert control over his own life. At one point, he actually ordered me, as the heir speaking to the spare, to shave. Are you serious? I'm telling you, shave it off. For the love of God, Willie, why does this matter so much to you? Because I wasn't allowed to keep my beard. Ah, there it is. After he'd come back from an assignment with Special Forces, Willie was sporting a full beard, and someone told him to be a good boy, run along, and shave it. He hated the idea of me enjoying a perk he'd been denied. I get where William is coming from. I understand it is frustrating that people have been denying you your free will your whole life. But Harry is not the correct target to take that anger out on. Deconstruct. This could be a moment in Prince William's deconstruction process. Deconstruct that idea. Blame Queen Victoria for creating the modern media circus that you see before you.
See, Albert had come up with a plan for appealing to the newly enfranchised middle class. He would offer himself and his family up as proto-celebrities. Alongside her political function as head of state, the Queen would now also be the head of a cultural phenomenon known as the royal family. The royal family wasn't only intended to be something for the emerging middle class to gossip about or buy terrible merch relating to. But Albert's intention was to craft a perception of the royals as a kind of ideal model family, which the British middle class could aspire to recreate in their own lives.
42. Harry is getting ready for his stag do. Apparently, Willie made jokes that he was going to force shave Harry to get rid of his beard. The fact that William does not have control over Harry in this one situation is becoming something that he cannot let go of. And that's unhealthy. You should work that one out in therapy. The stag do was fun. Chapter 43. more bizarre palace intrigue. It starts off, they're trying to decide whether or not Meghan is allowed to wear a veil at her own wedding. At first, the palace pushes back on this idea because apparently a divorcee is not allowed to wear a veil. I just can't. At a certain point, they unexpectedly, he says, showed some flexibility on the subject. Maybe that flexibility came from the fact that they found that Harry and Meghan weren't going to budge on certain things. Maybe that flexibility came from the fact where they were like, okay, let's get this royal wedding over with. Let's wrap it up. Maybe we can somehow convince Harry to divorce Meghan after it happens. That's purely speculation on my part. Then they have to think about a tiara. So some of the aunts offer for Meghan to wear one of Diana's tiaras, and they're touched. So they're all ready to go with Meghan wearing one of Diana's tiaras, when all of a sudden, right as the wedding's about to happen, the Queen reaches out and she says, do you want to have a look at any of the tiaras up here at Buckingham Palace? They're like, yeah, of course, let's head up. They go through, they're trying on all these tiaras. Meghan actually loves one of them, and so they're like, okay, cool. Queen specifically says, make sure that you are able to get this tiara ahead of time. Make sure that you work it with your hairstylist, see how it's going to look, see how it's going to be positioned, because it's trickier than it seems. But then somehow, as they're trying to contact Angela, who is like Granny's sort of comms assistant, about getting this tiara ahead of time, suddenly there's no responses. There's no messages going through. When they finally do get her on the phone, she basically tells them that the only way that the tiara can leave Buckingham Palace is if there's an orderly and a police escort there to escort the tiara out of the palace. Prince Harry is like, seems a little bit much, but okay, let's get an orderly and a police escort then. And then she tells them, can't be done. I'm too busy right now. Sorry. The plot thickens. Why all of this song and dance? I don't know, but the bureaucracy at which the family has to organize communicating amongst the family themselves, the amount of bullshit that they actually have to get through to have a normal life with their family members. If they were just normal people, they could just reach out to grandma and get the tiara and move on. But with all of these middlemen in the way, there's so many situations in which there can be little people pulling the strings, making everyone run around in circles and talking bullshit. It's bureaucracy at its finest. Chapter 44. The wedding is pretty much right around the corner. Surprise, surprise. All of the racist media harassment and all of the sort of racist online abuse against Meghan has created a situation in which Harry and Meghan for being black and Harry for being a race traitor, quote unquote, have become, quote, the prize target for terrorists and extremists. I remember General Dannett saying I was a bullet magnet, that anyone standing next to me would be unsafe. Well, I was a bullet magnet again, but standing next to me would be the person I loved most in the world. He talks about how there had been rumors floating around in the media landscape that Meghan had been trained in special forces and kidnapping attempts in order to prepare her for the amount of possible threats to her safety. Harry's like, that's bullshit. On the contrary, the palace floated the idea of not giving her any security at all because I was now sixth in line to the throne. Make it make sense. You are the royal family. The police come to you and they are like, Harry and Meghan are being actively targeted by terrorists and extremists. And the palace is like, should we remove Meghan's security because Harry's just sixth in line to the throne? The evidence that you're getting is that they need security. The police are telling you that there are active threats to their life. This raises a lot of questions. The question of security comes up so much in the book. Let's take a step back, okay? Let's think about, why does the British royal family have security? So the British royal family has security because they are members of the government. Don't kid yourself, they are in the government that are high profile and also have a very high sort of symbolic significance to them. In the same way that there's probably a lot more people, say, targeting the president as opposed to the vice president. In terms of like a political act of terrorism, it has more, you know, symbolic resonance to assassinate a president than it does for a lower level ranking member. However, that doesn't mean that if you are not the president, that there might not be some sort of symbolic significance in you being a potential target for terrorism. And how do you assess the threat level? Well, you're assessing that through monitoring social media, monitoring active terrorist organizations and their inner workings, infiltrating those terrorist organizations, you know, the policing aspect of all it, the investigative part of it. But you're also getting that from the amount of harassment that's coming to you. Harry and Meghan are receiving a lot of death threats, and not even just like random death threats on the internet, but like suspicious packages with white powders in them. Threats that require an active follow-up, so to speak. So for the palace to even float the idea that Meghan should have no security, when not only are the investigations looking into threats saying, man, there's a lot of terrorists out there that are thinking that you guys are a good target, and the amount of harassment that they are getting on their doorstep from like suspicious messages, packages, the royal family members are making choices that don't line up with reality. Either they are cold, heartless bastards that literally have just no emotional core to them whatsoever, or they are living in a constructed reality that is actively encouraging them to act in immoral ways and to make immoral choices and even to consider immoral actions. It's just baffling. At the end of the chapter, Harry finally is able to get in touch with Angela, who brings the tiara over to Kensington Palace. Seems like they didn't really need that police escort from the looks of it. He gives a little bit of a snide remark, and he says that Angela was literally having a go at him. I want to also say another thing that like just breaks the whole mythos of the royal family down. So when you think royal, you think they're the royal family, they're supposedly divinely touched by God. Everything that they say should go, right? And that they would be treated with like this extreme deference from everybody around them. If everybody that works for them and is around them believes that they are divinely touched by God and are sent here on this earth to rule over Britannia. But these people that work for the royal family, they don't see it that way, clearly. They talk back to Harry, they'll have goes at him, they'll just lie to him to his face. They'll just completely like disrespect Harry. Like, isn't that really baffling? Like, Harry has the word prince in front of his name. The fantasy that they've created, you treat him with the absolute deference. But no, they don't. They seem to actually be willing to disrespect him quite frequently, which is strange when you think that he apparently wields some special blood that makes him part of this whole monarchy thing. All these courtiers and all these comms team people, they really do think and believe they are the ones in the control here. They're the ones that have the power because they have like had their own little power plays in order to get to the positions that they're at. Don't fuck with me, because if you fuck with me, I'll go tell the press all your dirty little secrets. Hostile. Very hostile work environment. Chapter 45. Meghan is trying to talk to her father. Meghan's father seems to be very engrossed in tabloid culture. I think he really took to heart all of the bullying and harassment that was being put out by the papers, by the press, against him because of just his sort of overall strange demeanor. And Meghan was trying so hard to really try everything to soothe him in this uncomfortable situation. I mean, she had to go through it as well, right? This idea of people just constantly stalking you all the time and you feel like you can't leave the house. Plus, having to read all these horrible negative things about you and see it blasted all throughout the world. So Meghan is just pleading with her father, like, please, just like in person, please don't let them get to you. I know that like the pain that you're getting from like reading these stories, I know it's hard. You can't let that go away, but you have to try to ignore the paparazzi in person. Don't give them anything. Harry says that he seemed to be listening to this advice, and then suddenly right before the wedding, they get a call that the Mail on Sunday is about to run a story that Thomas Markle has been in cahoots with certain paparazzi to stage photos of himself. So this starts to alarm Harry and Meghan. They're like, what the hell? Like, I think they were totally blindsided by this. Like, they knew that Thomas Markle had like this weird unhealthy sort of relationship, obsession, fixation, I don't know, with the press, but I do not think that they were expecting this. So they get him on the phone immediately and they're like, Daddy, is this true? Like, are you going to do this? He tells them no. Meghan's like, I know that might be embarrassing, but like, you gotta tell us the truth. Please tell us the absolute truth, because if you're lying to us right now and it turns out that you did do that, then one, we can't kill the story for you. And two, he says, quote, we'll never be able to kill a false story about ourselves or our children again. So this is serious.
And on that call, I'd said to him, look, if they can't stop it, then it's gonna come out tomorrow. So why don't we send someone right now to your house to get you out of there now? Because if that's the case, your house will be stormed by media. We'll get you out of there now. It's like, we'll just come and get you a day early. Let's get you out of Mexico. And he said, no, I have things I need to do. And it felt really cagey. I was like, it doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense.
Thomas Markle is swearing up and down. I have not done this. I swear to God, I have not. Meghan kind of was like, you know what? I believe him. Like, I think I really trust him on this. And then she's like, well, okay, in that case, like, leave right now. Okay, leave right now. We can shelter you from the paparazzi. There's going to be like a whole new level of harassment coming on you because of this story. So like, we need to get you to a safe haven. His response is to tell them that he has plans. So he can't have them do that. And that's when Meghan realized, shit, I think he's lying. The story breaks and they see Thomas Markle had very clearly staged photos, like not even like staged to the point of comically staged. It seems like a complete setup that the paparazzi seems like they almost did it specifically so that they could break the story that he set up these photos with the paparazzi to humiliate him. Like somebody in their right mind could not think would be convincing as not staged, if that makes any sense. It just speaks to somebody that is not in a rational state of mind. So this story breaks literally a week before the wedding.
Mr. Markle allegedly staged photos of himself for the paparazzi, selling them for a reported $100,000.
This is tabloid fodder. They are going crazy with this story this morning.
Everyone was so frantic with preparing for the wedding itself. And then all of a sudden, just exploded.
I was absolutely stunned that Tom would become part of this circus.
As the photo scandal swirls around...
I feel sad that the media would run with this.
Do you have any reaction to your ex-husband apparently staging photos for the paparazzi?
That he would capitalize. Certainly as a parent, it's not your... No, that's not what you do. Not parenting.
Paps and journalists and media were following him all day, every day. The unraveling happened that week when he wouldn't pick up my call. And instead you're talking to TMZ.
He says, quote, Though the photos had been taken weeks before, they'd been held in reserve until the most devastating possible moment, which is another part of the weird media game, media manipulation, is that there will be stories that the press knows about in order to have leverage over the family, will hold on to them until they are like at the most devastating moment or in a news cycle where it can cause a dramatic shift in narrative. So in that way, it kind of becomes weaponized against the family members in such a targeted and brutal way that it's got to be coming from inside the house. Like, that's the conspiracy part. But the call is coming from inside the house. Yeah. Thomas Markle texts them. He says, I'm so ashamed. They're trying to get in response to him. They're trying to contact him. They try to tell him, like, we're not angry. Like, just please pick up. Please contact us. Like, let's try to do anything to make this better. And then suddenly they hear, along with the rest of the world through the media, that he had a heart attack and wasn't coming to the wedding. Big bombshell. The amount of stress that this would cause me, I cannot fathom. I cannot imagine. 46 is the chapter where Meghan and Kate have the infamous bridesmaid dress fitting drama. Like, I just literally, I cannot care about the dress stuff. The gist of this, basically, the reason why it's even in the book at all is because in this moment, Kate is messaging Meghan about bridesmaid dress bullshit. And Meghan is basically like, please handle this. I can't really handle this right now. Do it. Like, Kate wants to do something else. And Meghan's like, no, just do the thing. And then they have a falling out, like, over this. And because Kate is, like, so insistent on this and is, like, berating Meghan for, like, not doing the thing that she wants her to do, this causes Meghan to cry. And this will become manipulated into a media narrative that Meghan made Kate cry over these dresses when, in fact, the opposite happened. Since it's the night of his wedding, Harry's, like, hanging out with the boys, and all of a sudden he's like, hey, where's Willie? Where's my brother in all of this? Because I'm getting married. So William earlier kind of told him, yeah, can't make it. Sorry. Harry's like, but this is our tradition together. Like, remember that part where you got married and I was by your side the whole night and we, like, hung out and we went and did a walkabout? Like, remember all that? Like, remember how I supported you during your wedding? What else does he have to say? Harry makes a note as well that his best man at his wedding was not William, which is exactly what happened at William's wedding, where Harry was not William's best man. It doesn't even matter what they think, because the palace just puts out that they are each other's best men, because why not lie? The family's built on lies. That's why. So Harry is, like, continuously, like, asking, like, William, like, why can't you just be here to support me? Like, why can't you help me out? William basically is like, well, why does it even matter that much? These people are, like, so divorced from reality. Why does it matter that much that you're there to support your brother when he's getting married? He says, why are you even saying hello to the crowds, Harold? Because the press office told me to, as we did at your wedding. You don't need to listen to them. Since bloody when? Then Harry notes, just after leaving Granny's around 6 p.m., Willie texted. He changed his mind. He will come. Harry suspects Granny intervened. They go for a walkabout, shake the hands, kiss the babies. And then Harry's like, come have dinner with me. Like, lads. And William's like, can't, sorry. Trash behavior. The royal family cares so much about how things appear and not how things are. They want the appearance of two brothers that support each other through thick and thin. So publicly, they will do everything in their power to create the narrative that these brothers are close and willing to support each other and willing to stick by each other. That's why they lie about them being each other's best men. And that's why they go on this public walkabout right before Harry's wedding. But when it comes to William doing the actual work of being a good brother, like what that actually means, and to fulfill that duty in the private sphere, they can't do it. They don't know what it means to actually do the things that they want to project. They know to project the idea of two close, supportive brothers, but they don't know how to be close, supportive brothers. And that's the mind fuck. That's the cult part, right? That's the part where you're like, okay, this is a cult. You are doing something for the greater good, and there's all this language about the appearances of doing good work, doing this, that good things will happen, that you are doing something right and just. But then when you actually have to dissect, are you doing good? Are you inhabiting the characters that you actually self-proclaim to have or that you want to project? That's not how cults work. Like, cults don't actually want you to like have a supportive, loving family structure and friends that care about you and all those good fun things, because if you have all of those things, then you will have a sense of self that is not conducive to doing what the cult wants you to do, which is to suit the cult's interests at all costs. The disconnect is so strong. And if they did grow that relationship, it's actually scary for the institution itself, because the institution, you'll notice, has done a pretty good job at this idea of divide and conquer. Isolate every single family member into its own bureaucratic nightmare so that they actually can't like come together and be a family. Because if they were a family, they might love and care for each other in a way that doesn't suit the interests of monarchy. Chapter 48 is their actual wedding. Beautiful. It was beautiful. He loved it. Seeing Meghan for the first time, being up there at the altar with her, he finally just was like, this is what it's all about. It's this love between me and Meghan. That's all this is. It's about celebrating this. But he also notes that like they went into this knowing that 2 billion people were going to be watching this on TV.
There was an expectation, right? Diana's boy. There was an expectation to have a public wedding. It was like, mission complete with William. Now, let's see if this goes the distance with Harry, and then we can literally go, job done.
There were many conversations we had over how you want to present yourself to the world. I mean, most of us have a wedding with, 70 to 200 people. This was billions of people watching this wedding. It has to be flawless. It has to be perfect.
They knew that this wasn't really a moment that was going to be about them and celebrating like themselves in this like small sort of way. Before this large, grand royal wedding, they actually had just an unofficial ceremony just privately for themselves so that they could sort of go through that and they could make that commitment person to person instead of inviting the entire world into that relationship. And I think that's really cute. I think that was a really good idea for them. And I think it also helped them in that moment when they did have to perform this whole ceremony for the entire world. It just kind of helped them to know that this wasn't really about them, but this was about the show and the spectacle, and they could focus on the show aspect of it. And they got to enjoy the love part of it and the vows and their commitment to each other. They got to do that privately. Chapter 49, they go on their honeymoon. Meghan gets to go on a trip alone with the Queen. And she says, like, the Queen and I really bonded. Like, she's so happy that, like, she actually bonded with the Queen. They had a great time. But of course, glorious spin, the press ruins it by all these little things that they try to spin into breaks from protocol. One, because she entered a car before the Queen, even though she did exactly what the Queen said and she got in. If you believe in the monarchy, then what the Queen says goes, right? And 2, that there was a breach in protocol because Meghan wasn't wearing a hat in the Queen's presence. And Harry says, quote, "The palace had specifically directed Meg not to wear a hat. Granny also wore green to honor the victims of Grenfell Tower, and no one told Meg to wear green, so they said she didn't give a fig about the victims. I said the palace will make a phone call, they'll correct the record. They didn't. Sounds like a setup to me. It sounds like a massive setup from the firm. Whatever's going on in the firm sounds like a setup to me. What is so confusing and baffling is these stories in which the palace tells Meghan to do something. Meghan does that thing. Then she gets scolded by the press for doing the thing. And then the palace refuses to correct the record that they themselves were the ones to tell Meghan to do it in the first place. That's abuse. Why wouldn't the palace want to corroborate with Meghan that they were cool with whatever happened and there's no bad blood? The palace is fine with trying to make sure that there's no bad blood between different parties. They're happy to put out statements to make it seem like everybody's cool with everybody. But for some reason, they don't want to put out statements when Meghan is being scolded by the press for things that they told her to do. And the question is, why? Why won't they do that? Because it's a trap. Because they are literally trying to trap Meghan into doing things to garner more harassment, and then they want that harassment to continue. There's no other option. They know that Meghan is getting harassed over these things. Like, they cannot be ignorant of that. People at the palace, I can't say for like the royal family members themselves, but people at the palace know that Meghan is getting harassed. Somebody there must know. It's not a secret. So if they know that and they're not doing anything about it, then they want it to happen. Somebody must want it to happen, right? And they want it to happen to profit in some way. I don't know. The options are Meghan unalives herself. She gets harassed to the point where she cries to Harry and says, I don't think I can do this anymore, and divorces him. I don't know where she would go, but just, flees and they don't have to deal with her. Or she gets chased by the paparazzi until she is not alive. What are the options? The palace knows the options, I think, pretty clearly, and that's the part that's so scary, is if they know that those are the only ways that it can go, then they're looking for one of those things to happen. You don't want to get into a thing where you're like, the royal family has decided that the way to deal with people that they don't approve of is to get them killed. Like, it's so baffling because the royal family, there's already that type of thinking floating around about the royal family, right? Like, I jokingly said in my last video, like, they killed her about Diana. I was like, they killed her. That's the joke. People literally think the royal family, like, had her murdered. But then I read this book, and then I'm kind of like, but, like, really, though, like, if you don't stop it from happening, maybe you are trying to kill them. Like, it's not a good look. It's really not a good look on the royal family.
Also, I think for people to really understand, when you plant a seed that is so hateful, what it can grow into. I mean, just a couple days ago, I was going through the manual for our security team at home, and on one of the pages that I happened to flip to, it was about online monitoring, and they were like, if you see a tweet like this, please report it to head of security immediately. It just said, Meghan just needs to die. Someone needs to kill her. Maybe it should be me. And you're just like, okay. That's like what's actually out in the world because of people creating hate. And I'm a mom. It's my real life. And that's the piece when you see it and you go, you are making people want to kill me. It's not just a tabloid. It's not just some story. You are making me scared, right? And like that night, to be up and down in the middle of the night, looking down my hallway, like, are we safe? Are the doors locked? Is security on? Is everything? That's real. Are my babies safe? And you've created it for what? because you're bored or because it sells your papers or it makes you feel better about your own life. It's real what you're doing. And that's the piece I don't think people fully understand.
Thought I'd go for a change of view, change of scenery. A student gave this to me. Why did every chapter have to be so interesting, Harry? Come on. All right, we're getting into an interesting part of the whole ordeal here. Now that we're after the wedding, we're going to see how everything takes a turn for the worst. All of the relationships that Harry and Meghan had built up within the royal family and seemed to be on good terms start to disintegrate because of the whole toxic culture between the royal family and the media. Right after the wedding, the media is willing to turn right back to scolding Harry and Meghan for every little thing in retaliation, potentially, for Harry trying to get an apology from Rupert Murdoch and all of the people that phone hacked him back in the early 2000s. But because the royal family is so engrossed in the tabloid culture and the media, they start to absorb some of the messaging of the media, and it really starts to infect like their inner relationships as well. In chapter 50, William and Kate invite Harry and Meghan over to their house to sort of clear the air. They talk about walking into Kensington Palace and Meghan just like literally walking around being like, wow, oh my goodness. The mere craziness of thinking that William and Kate are living in this luxurious, extravagant palace that is essentially a museum full of artifacts and art, and Harry and Meghan are living in like a modest house on their property. It just speaks to some sort of like wackiness. Why would a family ever accept this type of extravagant difference in how their two sons are being housed? It's really wild. And he even mentions that they were looking around thinking about all of the IKEA furniture that Meghan had put on her credit card to furnish their modest dwellings. It's really baffling to think about that Meghan was even paying for a single goddamn thing in their house when they are the royal family. But they go in and Meghan is immediately trying to clear the air, trying to say like, what do you think happened? Like, do you think we got off on the wrong foot? Like, what can we do to sort of rectify this situation? Like, there's clearly tension here. Meg even offers like, is this because of the bridesmaid's dress incident? But Harry writes, quote, but it turned out there were other things about which we'd been unaware. Willie and Kate were apparently upset that we hadn't given them Easter presents. Now, this is like a very bizarre detail. So bizarre that it makes me inclined to believe that this is true. Harry notes that this isn't some like weird royal family tradition thing. I've never heard of this. Harry has never heard of this. It's a pretty bizarre sort of claim that Willie and Kate are making, that somehow that gives them a right to be upset. Very, very strange. But Harry goes on to note that this essentially became like some sort of weird airing of grievances between them.
The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances.
There was like this back and forth about Harry and Meghan were upset that William and Kate like switched place cards, and then they said that they had done the same thing at Pippa's wedding, and it's like so much drama. And then Kate mentions that she was upset at one point when she was pregnant that Meghan had made some sort of joke or some sort of offhanded remark about Kate had like forgotten something, and Meghan said, oh, like must be a case of baby brain or like something like that was like kind of dismissive. I think Meghan was just trying to make a joke like, oh yeah, you know, it's the hormones, things happen sort of thing, but Kate took it like really personally. Harry alleges that Kate said, quote, we're not close enough for you to talk about my hormones. Meg's eyes got wide too. She looked genuinely confused. I'm sorry I talked about your hormones. That's just how I talk with my girlfriends. Willie pointed at Meg. It's rude, Meghan. It's not what's done here in Britain. Okay, I want to know, like, How does William know anything about how things are done in Britain? Like, he does not exist in, like, the regular Britain that most people live in, you know? 2, William points his finger in Meghan's face as he's claiming that she's being rude because she made an offhand joke about Kate's hormones. It's just so ridiculous. It just seems like they are looking for things to be offended by. I just want to point out there's a very big difference between offense and harm, right? William and Kate are coming into this conversation as if Harry and Meghan have harmed them in some way. They don't seem to have any sort of harm. They are just offended. You can be offended while also acknowledging that there was no harm, right? It's fine for Kate to be offended by Meghan's remark. Maybe she didn't appreciate it. That's their right. It's a feeling that they can have, but they can also acknowledge that, like, there was no harm caused. Like, Meghan making this offhand remark was not a harm. She can apologize for the offense, but there was no harm. Not giving them an Easter present, it's not a harm. Right? Even if they're offended, that's fine, but they can just be like, hey, can we exchange Easter presents next year? They don't have to make it so serious. So they kind of, like, walk away from this conversation, like, kind of making up, but it's still pretty tense. But I think Harry is just kind of under the impression that, like, okay, at least we, like, cleared the air somewhat. But because of this tension, people in the office, again, once they go back to business, they're going to notice the friction, and all of those people are leaky as fuck, and they are always talking to the press. So all of these sort of gossipy stories about Team Cambridge, Team Sussex, the rivalry, that's starting to get out into the press. And Harry just notes it was just so stressful because they have this one tiny team, and they have to fight off, like, so many errors and so many problems with the reporting and the tabloids. They just couldn't address, like, how much misinformation was out there, how many things were being leaked, how many things were just being outright fabricated. It was hard for them to even get through all of it. Harry says, for all this, every bit of it, Willie blamed one person, Meg. He told me so several times, and he got cross when I told him he was out of line. He was just repeating the press narrative, spouting fake stories he'd read or been told. The great irony, I told him, was that the real villains were the people he'd imported into the office, people from government, who didn't seem impervious to this kind of strife, but addicted to it. They had a knack for backstabbing, a talent for intrigue, and they were constantly setting our two groups of staff against each other. So William is starting to internalize the press narratives that the royal family itself plays a part in creating. It's very strange. William should know, as a member of the royal family, how much is out there in the media about him that isn't true, about him that doesn't represent him as a person. And yet, when it comes to Meghan, he's able to take in all that information from the press totally uncritically. And so that starts to be a bit of a question. Is William influencing the press to put out these things and they are regurgitating what William is saying? Or is William reading what the tabloids are writing and is he taking that in uncritically and taking that as his own opinion? Or is it a combination of both? But in either case, William should be dealing with who he's actually talking to right in front of him, the person that actually exists that is Meghan. But William himself is dealing with some sort of weird caricature of Meghan that he has created in his mind. Even though he has full access to Meghan, he could talk to Meghan and experience her. And he doesn't have to like her. He doesn't have to be friends with her. He should know that, like, she is not, like, 100% responsible for all of the harassment and misinformation that's going out into the public and causing all this chaos in their business. It's just illogical on Prince William's part. Chapter 52. Harry starts to note that Meghan is losing a lot of weight. It seems like the stress of everything is really taking a toll on her. And he even seems to suggest that this caused them difficulties in getting pregnant for the first time, which is really sad that this kind of harassment was really taking a physical toll on her. He mentions them going up to Scotland to visit his father, and he again notes the bond between Meghan and Prince Charles is super strong. They have so much in common. They love all the same things. And he also notes that Meghan shares a birthday with Gan, the queen mum, who Harry says is Charles's favorite person in the world, bringing in that whole like destiny, fate sort of idea into the book again. Harry tries to talk to him again about all the press harassment. How can we just let it slow down just a little bit? How can we sort of minimize it just a teensy bit? He's not even asking for a lot. All he seems to want to say is don't read it. As they're all sitting around, suddenly a call comes in from the Queen, and it's for Meghan. Meghan picks up the phone, and the Queen basically is asking her about her father. It sounds like the royal family is a little bit fed up with Meghan's father, like, constantly getting involved with the tabloids and the press, which seems interesting because they didn't seem to want to help him at all before they got married, but now that the wedding is over and it seems like he no longer serves any purpose, now the royal family is like, okay, can you like get your father to please shut up? Like, we can't have him like constantly making us look bad.
So when did things start to go awry there?
When the media got involved.
Well, we're joined this morning by Meghan Markle's father, Thomas. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to take you
After the wedding, my dad started doing these interviews, mostly saying things about me.
Meghan Markle's dad, right?
Yeah, I spoke with Thomas Markle yesterday, and he was really upset about
this. Does not stop, apparently.
It was incredibly painful. And the world is watching this drama play out. And then he started criticizing the royal family. But it was very embarrassing for the family. It was a problem that needed to be solved, and they wanted me to make it stop.
So they basically tell Meghan, go talk some sense into your father. She can't really travel over there without causing like suspicion that she's going to go visit him. So the Queen and Charles, who agrees with her, basically tell Meghan to write a letter to her father instead, pleading with him to basically shut the fuck up. Chapter 53 is an interesting little interlude where they're on the beach. In the previous chapter, his father had told him that he should like sing to the whales and they'll sing in response. So Harry calls out and sings to the whales, and then he tells the story to one of his chefs or something like that. He explains to him that actually when you call them over, because there are so many killer whales, so quote, singing to seals was like calling them to their blood-soaked deaths. I shook my head. It had been such a lovely fairy tale, I thought. How did it get dark so fast? Chapter 54, Meghan finally gets pregnant. Chapter 55, they basically go tell the whole family about it. He says Charles was happy, William was happy, Kate was happy. It doesn't seem like anyone was upset about it. Chapter 56, Harry and Meghan go on a tour of Australia and a couple of other countries around there in the Commonwealth. And he notes that everybody welcomed them there. Everyone was so excited to see them. And that gets Harry thinking, I think we're doing a little too well.
The work that they were doing, the speeches, the people they were meeting, like, it seemed to be amazing. And then I don't understand what happened after that.
I think Australia was a real turning point because they were so popular with the public. The internals at the palace were incredibly threatened by that.
Putting aside what I think about her, right? She's becoming a royal rock star. Bigger, I would argue, as a couple than William and Kate. That's probably not a good thing in the long term.
He says to Meghan, quote, you're doing too well, my love, too damn well. You're making it look easy. This is how everything started with my mother. Maybe I sounded mad, paranoid, but everyone knew that Mummy's situation went from bad to worse when she showed the world, showed the family that she was better at touring, better at connecting with people, better at being royal than she had any right to be. Because they did so damn well on this tour, the press has like no real way to spin it. They're finally getting some pretty good coverage. But of course, as soon as they're seeing that they're getting pretty good coverage, suddenly all the shit hits the fan. They're getting more misinformation. Harry says there's like some hack biographer of Prince Charles who puts out a hit piece. There were all these stories about Meghan being rude or bullying her staff and all these other weird things. He also notes, quote, she was also said to have driven our assistant to quit In fact, that assistant was asked to resign by Palace HR after we showed them evidence she'd traded on her position with Meg to get freebies. It's like literal corruption. And them weeding out corruption in their own institution is getting them negative press. Then there were fake stories about the tiara, claiming that like Meghan had a tantrum and she really wanted that tiara, and that Meghan was somehow like being super demanding about the tiara. And the sort of straw that breaks the camel's back for them is when the story about the bridesmaid's dress comes out, yet it's reported that Meghan made Kate cry in the interaction. I think this one hits them the hardest because they know that this story has a grain of truth to it, but they also know that whoever reported on that story must have actively lied about it, right? Because that thing with the bridesmaids' dresses did happen. So somebody within their inner circle must have told somebody about it. And yet to mix it up and say that Meghan made Kate cry when Kate really made Meghan cry means that somebody must have like actively deceived somebody when they were leaking that story. And I think that really makes Meghan feel actively betrayed. Chapter 57, because the tensions don't seem to have changed very much between the Fab Four, so to speak, Harry and Meghan invite William and Kate over to their house to try to clear the air again, or to try to ameliorate the situation somehow. So Meghan kind of confronts Kate and says, you know that story didn't happen the way that it was reported, right? And Kate agrees, yeah, I know, I made you cry. But then Meg is starting to confront them and say, well, then why aren't your people standing up for me? Why aren't you guys trying to correct the story? Kate and William just kind of like duck and dodge the question, being evasive. But Harry says he knows the reason why. Because in the palace's mind, the palace thinks that the press is going to come back and say, quote, well, if the story's wrong, what's the real story? What did happen between the two duchesses? And that door must never be opened because it would embarrass the future queen. The monarchy, always, at all costs, had to be protected. Again, it's that like cult-like high demand group sort of thinking. You have to protect the group or this ideal at all costs, even when it ruins people's lives, ruins people's relationships. Why? What for? For what purpose? Just to get people money, essentially. But money is not going to buy you happiness. Everyone's going to be miserable. So because they know that William and Kate aren't going to do anything about the story, they kind of shift the conversation and ask, well, who could have leaked this story? Obviously, it had to be leaked from one of you guys because, hello, it was just the four of us here, you know? Like, we were the only people that knew about it. So William finally sheepishly admits that actually, you know, we did go to dinner with Charles and Camilla once, and we might have mentioned that story to them while we were there. I'm pretty sure the implication is that all four of them knew in that moment that Charles and Camilla's team must have leaked it in order to denigrate Meghan, which once again shows how fucking evil Charles and Camilla's press office is. For no reason. They only leaked this fake story. They briefed against their own children's wives because Harry and Meghan got some good press coverage in Australia, and that made them mad because then it detracted from Charles and Camilla. Isn't that crazy? They literally cannot trust their own father and stepmother to keep their goddamn mouth shut so that they don't attract more press harassment from their own family members. It's just so crazy. Chapter 58, the press continuing to be absolutely crazy. I think Harry makes a really good observation here when he says, quote, notably, it was around this time that the super narrative embedded within each story began to shift. It was no longer about two women fighting, two duchesses at odds, or even two households. It was now about one person being a witch and causing everyone to run from her, and that one person was my wife. And in building this super narrative, the press was clearly being assisted by someone or multiple someones inside the palace. Someone who had it in for Meg. And I think that becomes really hella scary. And I think we can see why Harry is starting to panic in this moment. There is a little bit of security in the idea that, oh, everybody in the royal family gets harassed, or everybody in the royal family is seen as a clueless, helpless git to a certain extent, right? If the narrative is just like, oh, the battling royal ladies, or the battling brothers, or tensions between the family, that's one thing, right? Conflict is always used to sell the tabloids, right? It's still disgusting, but there is a little bit of a safety in that all of that sort of like disgust and hatred and anger that people feel reading those stories, the outrage that they feel, is directed at multiple people to a certain extent. But when the press narrative starts to immediately become from every other press office in the royal family, because it's clear that Clarence House is leaking these things and now Kensington Palace is starting to leak these things too. When it starts to become everybody gang up on this one person, that is so dangerous. You are putting a target directly on that person's back. And in the royal family, that is life and death. It only takes one crazy person to acquire a weapon or send some sort of threat, bring it to some walkabout or some sort of event, and cause horrible things to happen. And it seems like the royal family is either completely clueless about how much danger they are putting Meghan in, which they shouldn't be because they have access to that knowledge about how many threats they are getting, or they just don't care. And if they don't care, that's pretty cruel and shameless and heartless. I do have some sympathy because I think some of the actors in this system are just ignorant, or are just, I don't want to use the word brainwashed necessarily, but they're conditioned with this line of thinking. The monarchy must be protected. People can be sacrificed if necessary. But that's still a really cruel and heartless thing to do. And I think Harry in this moment is, when he sees this shift, he's starting to see the danger. Chapter 59, Harry asks his grandmother if they can get a new house. Now that Meghan is pregnant, they're thinking that their house is a little bit too small for a family of 3. So the Queen gets back to them and gifts them Frogmore Cottage, which they love because they used to have all of their dates there, and it reminds them of the beginning of the relationship. This is the house that Prince Charles later evicted them from so that Prince Andrew could live there. Chapter 60, content warning, okay, for suicidal ideation. Harry walks in to find Meghan like uncontrollably sobbing, like to the point where he literally thinks that like they've lost the baby. Like that's how distraught she seems. And she basically says to him like, I don't want to live. I don't want to live anymore. And he's like, what? Why are you saying that? Like, what's going on? She's like, it's just all so painful to be hated like this. Like, what for? And she describes to him that like she just feels in pain constantly and there's just no way to make that pain stop. And she's suddenly having these thoughts in her head that are saying, well, there's only one way to make this stop. It's for you not to be here anymore. And to her, that's just, it's really scary.
It's like, all of this will stop if I'm not here. And that was the scariest thing about it, is it was such clear thinking.
I remember her telling me that she had wanted to take her own life. And that really broke my heart because I knew that it was bad, but to just constantly be picked at by these vultures, just picking away at her spirit, that she would actually think of not wanting to be here. That that's not an easy one for a mom to hear.
Meghan says in the documentary that this is like one of the first times ever that she's had these kind of like suicidal or like clinically depressive like thoughts, like deep depressive thoughts. I can understand why this would be so scary for her, that suddenly you're getting these thoughts of like, I just don't even want to be here anymore. I don't want to wake up and do this again. She also says as well, like, she's starting to think like, if I wasn't here anymore, the press wouldn't be harassing you like this. They wouldn't be harassing me like this. I don't want my children to grow up in this. Like, if I just didn't exist, all of this would go away. It's really horrible because obviously that thought process is wrong in a lot of ways. Like, her not being alive would not make Harry feel better or have a better life. Like, obviously he would be absolutely destroyed. But in some ways there is such this truth to it of like, they hate her so violently. They hate her so virulently. It almost seems like, just give them what they want. They just want me to die. Like, I'll do it. Like, and that's such a horrible thing to think that she thought, especially when she is pregnant with her child. To be in such a horrible state like that, to be thinking in that way, I cannot imagine. Just horrible. Absolutely horrible. Harry kind of scolds himself in this chapter, and he says that he, quote, couldn't entirely stop thinking like a fucking royal, because he's thinking, well, they have an engagement to go to that night, and he's still in that mode of like, well, we can't skip that. Like, what are people gonna think if we don't go to this event? Like, we need to go on there, put a happy face. His wife is literally just told him, like, I don't want to be alive anymore. Anybody in that circumstance in the real world would be like, okay, we're not going to this event. We're going to stay home. We're going to like sit down, talk about our feelings, like eat some ice cream, like just try to, climb the ladder out one rung at a time, like that's how most of us would deal with this idea of like suicide, or get help. I mean, she doesn't seem like she actively is going to harm herself. She just has suicidal ideations. She doesn't seem to have suicidal intent. But yeah, most people would be like, hell no, we're not going to go to this event. But Harry, again, has been just so conditioned. What are other people going to think? We can't let these people down. We've got to get the pictures over there. We got to go do this. So they just put on a brave face and go sit in Royal Albert Hall. And he mentions that, like, as soon as the lights dimmed and the show started, like, Meghan just broke down into sobs. He was, like, comforting her the entire time. Having to feel like in my darkest moments, in my, like, deepest moments of pain, that I would feel like I was obligated to just go to an event that, like, people just don't even really care about. Really, would anything change if they hadn't gone? Does anyone even care if they went to see Cirque du Soleil or not? Like, no, it's just for the marketing machine of the royal family. And that surpasses, like, all human decency and empathy. It's horrifying. Chapter 61, they get a text from Jason, their comms team leader, I think. I don't know, communications secretary. I don't know what his job title was. The Mail on Sunday has gotten a copy of the letter that Meghan wrote to her father.
It was horrendous. For the Daily Mail, it said, we have the full and complete 5-page letter. I was like, what would it look like if you redacted the stuff that they didn't put in? What would it look like? So you could really see, like, they're telling the public, here's this whole letter. And when you're literally taking sentences out of paragraphs and words out of sentences, you want to print my letter, which you can't do legally, but you want to print it and paint a completely different picture of who I am and my relationship with my dad, and take out every single thing I said about how the media's manipulated you.
People are still scratching their heads going, how would the Mail have either the stupidity or the, whatever you want to call it, to print a letter between a daughter and a father? Well, the answer is simple. They knew the family would encourage us not to sue.
We sat down with the lawyer for the institution and senior members of the palace. And it was in those meetings that I reminded them that I wrote that letter at the guidance of senior members of the family. You know this is unlawful, so we have to draw the line. we have to take legal action. So they said, yes, 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 of course. And I would follow up for weeks and weeks and weeks. Hey, what's going on with this? Nothing.
Harry notes that, quote, I didn't want to hear any more talk of protocols, tradition, strategy. Enough, I thought, enough. The paper knew it was illegal to publish that letter. They knew full well and did it anyway. Why? Because they also knew Meg was defenseless. They knew she didn't have the staunch support of my family. And how else could they have known this except from people close to the family or inside the family? The papers knew that the only recourse Meg had was to sue, and she couldn't do that because there was only one lawyer working for the family, and that lawyer was under the control of the palace, and the palace would never authorize him to act on Meghan's behalf. Legal superhero Harry finally pulls out his cape and really starts to think like a lawyer, as Legal Eagle would say. Harry thinks, look, this is crossing so many lines that it's not even funny. The papers did something that they knew was illegal. They published a private correspondence between two parties that was intercepted. That is illegal. This is like the phone hacking, but just like out in the open. They just published something that they knew was illegal for them to publish, specifically because they had insider information about the family and knew that the family hated Meg for some reason and knew that they weren't going to get sued because the palace would talk Meghan out of it because they don't like her and they don't support her. So they went through with illegal activity specifically because they knew that the palace would not support her. Oh God, my camera died. Okay, let's finish the book, shall we? We're so close to the end. Let's go. So, end of chapter 61. After this letter is published, Harry and Meghan are like, we have to sue. Like, this has to be a lawsuit, because if we don't sue in this moment, the press is just never going to learn their lesson. Harry is literally like, what does it have to take for everybody to wake up from this situation and realize, like, this is morally wrong? Like, do they have to wait for somebody to die to see, like, how bad that this has gotten? He also notes the palace has sued the media before, right? This isn't something new that they're asking them to do. He notes Prince Charles has sued for the release of the Black Spider memos. Prince William and Kate Middleton have sued paparazzi over topless photos of Kate. So again, it's not like this is unheard of in the royal family, and yet they're still advising them not to go after the publishers for publishing what they knew was illegal, this letter that Meghan had sent in confidence. The chapter ends with Harry saying, quote, I told Meg you'd think we were suing a dear friend of theirs, which, based on how the media has been reacting to Harry suing A&L, MGN, NGN, and the royal media spin that has been coming out, it kind of seems like they did sue a dear friend of theirs. Chapter 62. William asks Harry if he can come over to talk to him. He said he just wants it to be between the two of them. Meg was out with some friends somewhere else. So William comes over, and it seems like he's immediately angry about something. The exchange goes, Meg's difficult, he said. Oh, really? She's rude. She's abrasive. She's alienated half the staff. Not the first time he'd parroted the press narrative. Duchess difficult, all that bullshit. Rumors, lies from his team, tabloid rubbish, and I told him so. Again, told him I expected better from my older brother. I was shocked to see that this actually pissed him off. Had he come here expecting something different? Did he think I'd agree that my bride was a monster? I told him to step back, take a breath, really ask himself, wasn't Meg his sister-in-law? Wouldn't this institution be toxic for any newcomer? Worst case scenario, if his sister-in-law was having trouble adjusting to a new office, a new family, a new country, a new culture, couldn't he see his way clear to cut her some slack? Couldn't you just be there for her, help her? But William doesn't seem to be having it. He basically tells Harry that Meghan is trash and that he should do something about it. Harry's like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do about it? Like, what do you want? Me to divorce her? Leave her? Like, what are you asking? But from Harry's perspective, William isn't speaking rationally. He's not acting rationally. He's just mad at Meghan and thinks that she's the cause of all of their problems. Harry notes, quote, he seemed aggrieved. He seemed put upon that I wasn't meekly obeying him, that I was being so impertinent to deny him or defy him, to refute his knowledge, which came from his trusted aides. There was a script here, and I had the audacity not to follow it. So Harry says William is just there ranting and raving and calling him names and just getting irritated because there's no solution here that William will be satisfied with other than like total obedience, right? He doesn't even really know what he wants because I think he realizes it's silly to ask Harry to divorce Meghan. Why would Harry want to do that? They can't fire her. They can't kick her out of the family business. Like, there's no way out of this. He's just mad about Meghan and regurgitating all of the grievances that seem to be in the tabloids. But there's no solution here. So he's just getting more and more frustrated, more and more irritated. Harry says, Willie, give me one example of he cut me off. He said he was trying to help me. Are you serious? Help me? Sorry, is that what you call this? Helping me? For some reason, that really set him off. He stepped towards me swearing. To that point, I'd been feeling uncomfortable, but now I felt a bit scared. I stood, brushed past him, went out to the kitchen to the sink. He was right on my heels, berating me, shouting. And as Harry is trying to hand William a glass of water to try to get him to calm down or like see reason or anything, that's when William attacks Harry. He says, quote, he set down the water, called me another name, then came at me. It all happened so fast, so very fast. He grabbed me by the collar, ripping my necklace, and knocked me to the floor. I landed on the dog's bowl, which cracked under my back, the pieces cutting into me. I lay there for a moment, dazed, then got to my feet and told him to get out. Come on, hit me. You'll feel better if you hit me. Do what? Come on, we always used to fight. You'll feel better if you hit me. No, only you'll feel better if I hit you. Please, just leave. So William leaves the kitchen after he's literally knocked Harry to the floor. Like, this is an attack, right? This isn't a fight. I really want to make clear because when the book came out and there was all of this hullabaloo about this story in particular, the amount of media spin to try to downplay this incident and sound like, oh, it was just brothers fighting. They just got into a little scuffle. That's not what's happened here, and that's not what's described here.
The palace have been worried about this book, more worried about the book than the Netflix series that Harry and Meghan have done for some time now. And, I mean, perhaps it's the cynic in me that this sounds like a very silly scrap between brothers, which do happen. Yes, Harry was pushed to the floor. Yes, he landed on a dog bowl, apparently, which cracked and caused some marks on his back. Prince William also tore a necklace off Harry, which I think the interesting detail about that is that Harry wore a necklace, not that it was torn off. And this was obviously the sort of crunch point of their conflict, which everybody has known about for some time. There will be more to come. Harry's on a sort of pre-publicity tour for the book, which comes out on Tuesday, my birthday. I hope no one gets it for me. But it's it seems like I mean, it's obviously interesting, titillating. But it's not going to destroy the royal family.
Well, and yet we were both saying this morning, this is a man who fought in Afghanistan, flew Apache helicopters, talks about being terrified when his brother screamed at him and is now being seen to be knocked over by a dog bowl and calling his therapist straight away. Does it make him actually appear...
wet,
as opposed to his brother being a bully? I mean, a lot of people can see why Prince William is extremely frustrated.
Well, this is the other thing about the Harry and Meghan story. There's always this sort of comedy aspect. Does he really realise how wet he sounds? I mean, another detail, which, you know, I think will amuse a lot of people, is that William says, don't tell Meg about this. And Harry says he does eventually tell Meg about it, but he first talks to his therapist, because that's what you do, obviously, when you have an argument with your brother. You talk about your therapist.
Well, you do if you live in California, of course.
You live in California, yeah. Although, of course, at the time they were living at Nottingham Cottage, which, according to the Netflix documentary, they found very difficult because it was so small.
Yes, Oprah said nobody would believe you'd be living in this tiny cottage in the grounds of a palace.
And Harry is so tall that he kept hitting his head, which gives even more impressive that William managed to knock him over.
This is William literally lunging at his brother and knocking him to the floor, pushing him onto a dog bowl that cut up his back. Like, this is not a fight. In fact, he's trying to encourage it to be a fight, and Harry is denying him that satisfaction of having a full-out brawl because he knows that it's not healthy. It's not helpful for either of them. So yes, this was an attack from William. This was not just some little scuffle between the two of them. William left the kitchen. He comes back a couple minutes later and tells Harry that he shouldn't mention this to Meghan at all. Harry says, "You mean that you attacked me?" "I didn't attack you, Harold." "Fine, I won't tell her." "Good, thank you." The gaslighting. Like, Harry has literally been knocked to the floor, pushed to the floor by his own brother. And then his brother immediately 2 minutes later is like, "Oh, I didn't attack you. That didn't happen. And even though it didn't happen, you shouldn't tell Meg about it." This is very disconcerting because this is like classic domestic abuse, right? It's an abuser abusing another member of their family and then telling that family member not to speak about it to other loved ones, trying to claim it's like their little secret, that he literally knocked him to the ground and hurt him, grabbed him, ripped his necklace off, pushed him to the floor. Harry obliges and doesn't tell Meghan right away, but he does say that he spoke to his therapist about it because he needed to talk to somebody. But even though he didn't tell Meghan, Meghan noticed the bruises and cuts on his back, and at that point, he had to come clean. He said that she wasn't angry at all, but just terribly, terribly sad. Because it is terribly sad. But Harry also notes that he's proud of himself in that moment for not hitting his brother back, for not taking the bait, and being able to control himself and regulate his emotions. And he should feel proud of that. This is a really sad and horrifying moment, and for the press or the media to try and downplay this incident and act like it wasn't really that big of a deal is victim blaming, and it's like downplaying abuse, like actual physical abuse. Chapter 63, due to all of the tensions between the Fab Four and plus this incident and a whole bunch of other things that we've talked about, the Cambridge and Sussex offices are officially splitting up so that they don't have the same like press teams and comms teams and stuff like that. He says the family doesn't comment on it. Nobody else comments on it. And this gets sort of Harry thinking about the whole never complain, never explain aspect of the family. He writes, "It made me think, really think about the silence that surrounded everything that happened to me and Meg. I'd always told myself, just because everyone in my family didn't explicitly condemn press attacks, it didn't mean they condoned them. But now I asked, is that true? How do I know? If they never say anything, why do I so often assume that I know how they feel?" Which is an excellent point, right? The reason why the royal family likes to hold on to this whole never complain, never explain idea, which isn't even true based on how much they leak and brief against each other, is because they want people to project their own thoughts onto the royal family members. So when they don't comment on something, the public and commentators can project their own feelings or their own thoughts onto the royal family and assume that the royal family agrees with what they're saying, even when they don't say anything. And Harry notes that he's doing the same thing. He's projecting this idea that they don't condone these press attacks because they're not making a public statement. But how does he know that to be true if they're not commenting on it? That's just a hope that he's projecting onto them that they genuinely don't want this to happen. But they're not actually saying that they don't want it to happen. It really calls into question for him whether the royal family is really even acting like a family at all, which is a big theme of the book, right? That the royal family wants to project the ideas of being a model family, of being the perfect family, when they're not treating each other like a family. He's noting they're not standing up for each other. They're not rallying to support one of their family members, their first biracial family member. If they're not defending each other, then really can they call themselves a family at all? And I think this is part of Harry's sort of deconstruction of everything. He's deconstructing this idea that they don't want the press to harass them, that they do have their best interests at heart, that they are a family, that they do care about each other. All of that is like unraveling as Harry starts to question everything about the decisions that they've made and whether that has actually been in his and Meghan's best interest. Based on everything that they've had to go through and all of the abuse that they've had to suffer, it's hard for him to really believe now that the family has his back and that he's truly a member of the family and that Meghan is truly a member of the family. Chapter 64, they move their office to Buckingham Palace and they move into Frogmore. They now have a new head of comms, and with that head of comms, they're starting to make arrangements to try to avoid the royal rota and come up with a new strategy that doesn't involve giving everything over to the royal rota. William calls Harry and starts complaining that Charles and Camilla have briefed against him and Kate. He was seething, actually. I gathered that Pa and Camilla's people had planted a story or stories about him and Kate and the kids, and he wasn't going to take it anymore. Give Pa and Camilla an inch, he said, they'd take a mile. They've done this to me for the last time. I got it. They'd done the same to me and Meg as well. But it wasn't them, technically. It was the most gung-ho member of Pa's comms team, a true believer who devised and launched a new campaign of getting good press for Pa and Camilla at the expense of bad press for us. For some time, this person had been peddling unflattering stories, fake stories about the heir and spare to all the papers. I suspected that this person had been the lone source for stories about a hunting trip I'd made to Germany in 2017. Stories that made me out to be some fat-bottomed 17th century baron who craved blood and trophies, when in reality I was working with German farmers to cull wild boar and save their crops. I believed this story had been offered as a straight swap in exchange for greater access to Pa, and also as a reward for the suppression of stories about Camilla's son, who'd been gadding around London, generating tawdry rumors. I was displeased about being used like this, and livid about it being done to Meg, but I had to admit it was happening much more often lately to Willie, and he was justifiably incandescent, which if you know anything about, like, Mark Boland, is a fucking hilarious line. Incandescent with rage. Harry basically says that he believes that this true believer of Charles and Camilla has been responsible for a lot of briefing against him and Willie, and notes that it seemed to be happening more to William at this point in time. He says that William had already confronted Charles about this, and that Charles basically said William's paranoid. He said, quote, just because we were getting bad press and he was getting good, that didn't mean his staff was behind it, but we had proof. Reporters inside actual newsrooms assuring us that this woman was selling us out. Pa refused to listen. His response was churlish, pathetic. Granny has her person, why can't I have mine? By Granny's person, he meant Angela. Among the many services she performed for Granny, she was said to be skilled at planting stories. What a rubbish comparison, Willie said. Why would anyone in their right mind, let alone a grown man, want their own Angela? It's just so clear from this exchange that Charles' main focus is having somebody on his side, somebody on his team that's going to get him good coverage, that's going to get him in the papers and make him look good, but is not willing to listen to his sons saying that his person is actively harming his sons, is actually briefing against his sons. It's just really ridiculous. Charles should be thinking first and foremost about his sons and how they would feel about the stories that are being planted against them. But instead, he just focuses on, I want to have my person. I want to have my head of comms make me look good. Why can't I have that? The Queen has that. Why can't I have that? It's like, it's not about you, Charles. it's really not. He's just so up in his own world. So back to the current narrative. So when William is complaining to Harry about this negative coverage that he's receiving and talking about how unfair it is, Harry tries to use this as a springboard to talk about how they've been doing the same thing to Meg and trying to maybe get him to have some empathy for Meghan in this moment and see that they're actually not so different. But he says, quote, "In a blink, he shifted all of his rage to me." He was just going on and saying how much he disliked them and he's got problems with them, and he's just raging at Harry because he doesn't want him to think about how Meghan has been negatively treated. It's so difficult. Everybody in the royal family seems to be so focused on themselves and their own self-preservation that they get angry at having to think about anybody else's problems and to think about how other people's problems in the royal family might directly be connected to their own problems. So William is just like lashing out and raging at the idea of trying to connect the dots between his problems and Meghan's problems. He just doesn't want anything to do with thinking about that and reason and reconciling that. Probably because he's also responsible for how Meghan has been treated, just based on hints in the book. Again, they're so divided. They can't seem to like band together and think, oh, Charles and Camilla's team are against all four of us. Maybe we should all do something about it and come out stronger on top. They cannot unite. There's always conflict and there's always this tension that doesn't need to be there. They don't want to solve the problems. They're just in this like deep self-preservation mode where they're just angry and lashing out at each other. Chapter 65, Harry and Meghan's baby is about to be born. The palace starts putting pressure on them. When's the baby gonna come? The press can't wait forever. They're kind of like, what do you want us to do? Like, it's our baby. Like, you're just gonna have to wait. Why all this rush? He describes them in the hospital and the birthing process, how childbirth for Meghan was somewhat difficult. The baby's head got stuck and tangled, so they were contemplating potentially having an emergency C-section to remove him. But Archie is finally born, and Harry and Meghan are just like super happy. It's all over. They finally get to enjoy time with their newborn son. Harry says, "I don't remember phoning or texting anyone." He just doesn't have any connection to his family at all. He doesn't even think to like talk to them. Pretty much right after the baby is born, Sarah, their head of comms, puts out a statement saying that Meghan has gone into labor. They're like, the baby's here, what's going on? Quote, "She explained that the press must be given the dramatic, suspenseful story they demanded. But it's not true," I said. Truth didn't matter. Keeping people tuned to the show. That's the thing. Again, why all the spectacle? Why all of this for the royal baby? It's just for selling the fantasy, selling the fairy tale, making the monarchy into this big, glorious story of ladies get to be a princess, go ride in a carriage on their royal wedding, and then they get to have a beautiful baby and show it to the world. And it's just about selling and marketing all of that. They never get to just tell the truth. Be themselves. And then Harry notes one of the first things that happens is that a BBC reporter tweets out a picture of a chimpanzee with the caption, "Royal baby leaves hospital." The racism just never ends.
If anyone needed evidence as to why Meghan and Harry felt it necessary to protect their newborn baby from the media glare, they couldn't have asked for a better case to be made than the way in which the narrative played out after the birth.
Archie's just been born. Media, social media starts to sort of take on a life of its own. Someone in the media posting a photograph of a couple with a chimp. And at the top it said, "Royal baby leaves hospital." So that was one of the first things that I saw.
It was a metaphor for the way this family were being treated, that their dignity and their right to be treated equally and have their humanity respected and acknowledged was secondary to a white patriarchal media establishment.
The press just can't hold off on their racism, even in this moment. Chapter 66, Harry is sitting down with his grandma, the Queen, and trying to fill her in on all of the shit that they've had to deal with for months at this point. He said that she looked shocked and appalled when he told her about what was going on, and she vowed that she was going to get the bee, which is one of the courtiers, to help them with this situation, try to fix things, ameliorate it. Meredith Constant has a good video about who the bee, the fly, and the wasp are. I don't really remember who they are, so I'll just put it in here. Harry seems to insinuate that the bee, the fly, and the wasp are really taking advantage of his grandmother in her old age. He says, quote, "Deep down, I feared that each man felt himself to be the one true monarch, that each was taking advantage of a queen in her 90s, enjoying his influential position while merely appearing to serve." Brings up an interesting question. Was there elder abuse going on once the queen got to her old age? Was she really sort of a puppet on the strings of these courtiers instead of actually taking an active role in the monarchy? Very possible. Harry notes in the past they had gone to the Wasp to talk about different strategies they could take to combat the negative PR. He says he had agreed that it was abominable, something must be done, and then nothing happened. So in this case, when Granny says that she's going to get the bee on the case, they're a little bit skeptical that anything's going to be done because they've tried this in the past, but they're like, okay, let's give it the good old college try again. They meet with the bee. He's like, this is like one of the worst things we've ever seen in our life. This is unprecedented in British history, the amount of lies coming out. Something's got to be done about this. And then after this meeting, Harry says, yeah, they never heard from him again. So you can see over and over again, they go to different members of the family. They go to different courtiers. They go to different comms teams. They're trying everything to try and get somebody to listen to them and come up with concrete solutions to stop the barrage of hate that they're receiving. And they get no support from anybody, not from courtiers, not from comms, not from their family members. Everybody says, we're going to do something about it. We're going to take this seriously. This is bad. But then they just don't offer any solutions. Chapter 67, Meghan and Harry hang out with Elton John and his husband. It sounds like fun. Now that we know about like all the lawsuits and stuff, I think Elton John and his husband are involved in the A&L case. This might be a hint that that's sort of where they started to talk to Elton John and started to like coordinate those types of legal battles. Chapter 68, they go to South Africa and said it seemed like they were having a great time. It was lovely, but they knew right before they returned home that the news was going to break that they were suing 3 out of the 4 British tabloids. We know about these cases now. Now that we're in June 2023, we know all these cases now. This is the A&L case, the MGN case, and the NGN case. Harry notes at the end of this chapter that he was complaining to Elton John and David about how the palace was doing nothing to like help them or stop them or to aid them in these legal cases. And Elton John was like, why don't you just get your own lawyers? And Harry realizes he's just never thought of that before. He's never thought about getting his own legal representation. Again, the mind prison he's been in for like 30-something years, he doesn't even think about getting his own people that are on his side instead of relying on the palace. He notes, quote, "I'd been so conditioned to do as I was told." He's never been given the tools to like think for himself, get his own legal representation, get his own team. He's always been reliant on the family doing those things for him. This is his first time of thinking, I can step out and do this on my own. I don't need to get their permission. I don't need to get their approval. I don't need to use their people. Why not just do it for myself? So they told everybody in the family that these lawsuits were about to happen. Harry quotes his opening statement when these lawsuits were revealed. He writes, quote, "My wife has become one of the latest victims of a British tabloid press that wages campaigns against individuals with no thought to the consequences. A ruthless campaign that has escalated over the past year throughout the pregnancy and while raising our newborn son. I cannot begin to describe how painful it has been. Though this action may not be the safe one, it is the right one, because my deepest fear is history repeating itself. I lost my mother, and now I watch my wife falling victim to the same powerful forces." And he notes that the lawsuit was barely covered at all, which is what I've noticed as well, is that these lawsuits are barely covered at all. And when they are covered, they're covered in a very negative way. But he talks more about why he wanted to do this. And he talks about how this isn't wanting or needing good press. It's about not letting people get away with abuse and lies, especially the kind of lies that can destroy innocence. Around the same time, another story comes out. A story that claims that Meghan didn't care that she could have potentially poisoned Princess Charlotte when they put lilies of the valley into their wedding crowns, even though it's something that the family has done for multiple weddings. It's just exhausting, right? The media has gotten to such a toxic place that they're willing to run stories basically insinuating that Meghan had these like murderous intentions and didn't care that Princess Charlotte could die at her own wedding, just stirring up more and more hate against Meghan when they know it could lead to these really horrible outcomes. And the palace and their family are just still willing to do absolutely nothing about it. Chapter 17, with Granny, Pa, the Bee, and the Wasp. He says Meghan wasn't there. He says when he arrived, he was directly confronted about the lawsuits that he was filing. He said, quote, "My father said it was massively damaging to the reputation of the family." How so? It makes our relationship with the media complicated. Complicated, there's a word. Anything you do affects the whole family. One could say the same about all your actions and decisions. They affect us as well. Like, for instance, whining and dining the same editors and journalists who've been attacking me and my wife. This came up in the lawsuits recently where Harry was saying that the Queen had originally okayed for him to sue NGN for not giving them the apology that they were promised for phone hacking, and then his father immediately turning around and telling him that he shouldn't go after them, even when it had all been okayed by the Queen. That's not in the book, but we now know that and can apply it to the book in hindsight. He's right on the money here that Charles and Camilla have this deeply close relationship with these editors that have been attacking Harry and Meghan this whole time, and they've done nothing to whisper in their ear to stop it. Harry says, quote, "Everyone in this family has sued the press, including Granny. Why is this any different? Chirping crickets. Silence. We had no other option, and we wouldn't have had to do it if you had all protected us and protected the monarchy in the process. You're doing a disservice to yourselves by not protecting my wife." I looked around the table. Stony faces. Was it incomprehension? Cognitive dissonance? A long-term mission at play? Or did they really not know? Were they so deep inside a bubble that they really hadn't fully appreciated how bad things were? Like I said, I think part of it is the cult mentality. They're conditioned to protect the monarchy at all costs based on what they think is best for the monarchy without actually examining the situation and really brainstorming what's best for the monarchy. So I think that's what Harry is getting at here, is that they're so conditioned and they're so inside their own bubble that they don't fully understand the repercussions that are coming to Harry and Meghan, or that could be the case. He's saying he's still not fully sure why they still don't understand that they're putting them in danger, that this is really bad for them. He notes that on the palace's own social media accounts, there were still comments about Meghan that had not been expunged, calling her a yacht girl, an escort, a gold digger, a whore, a bitch, a slut, and the N-word on the palace's own social media accounts. And they're not moderating that, and they're not condemning those types of behaviors. He also notes that there were some racist texts that came out from Jo Marnie, who was a girlfriend of a UKIP leader named Henry Bolton, that said that Meghan would, quote, taint the royal family, setting the stage for a black king, and another averring that Miss Marnie would never have sex with a, quote, Negro. This is Britain, not Africa. Like, from Harry's perspective, this is like so bad and looks and reflects so poorly on the family he really cannot understand why they don't see it, why they don't understand how bad this looks for them. He says, quote, things had gotten so out of hand. 72 women in Parliament from both main parties had condemned the, quote, colonial undertones of all newspaper coverage of the Duchess of Sussex. None of these things had merited one comment, public or private, from my family. Harry is just like, how do they not see it? How do they not see how bad this is getting? Members of Parliament have condemned it. There have been people that have been caught saying the most horrible racist things about Meghan. One tweet called Meghan, quote, the Queen of Monkey Island. Like, this is just so bad. And it looks so bad on them, and they cannot understand, they cannot wrap their heads around it. But the thing is, I just think they don't want to see it because they don't want to talk about the race angle at all. He said they were still rationalizing it by saying that everybody had to go through it, that Camilla and Kate had to go through these things, and so they just had to put up with it. But he's saying there's just no precedent for the race angle here, and they just don't want to reconcile with that. They don't want to think about race and how race is fueling this hatred. And when race is fueling a hatred like that, it's really serious. It's really dangerous. It's not the same as just saying something mean or negative about somebody. Harry is talking to them. We've been having to deal with this on our own with this very small team. We're trying to put out all of these fires and we're getting absolutely no support from anybody else. He said the Queen looked at the Bee and the Wasp and asked, is this true? They straight up lie to the Queen and say that they didn't receive any requests for support whatsoever. Just straight up lies. Lying to the Queen. Like, that must be a crime, right? Chapter 71. Harry and Meghan are at some sort of like children's charity event. Harry says that while he was looking at all these like sick children and stuff, it got him a little bit emotional, a little bit teary. And so William comes to him and comments on it and is like, hey, are you doing well? Which, you know, you would think that would be kind of nice. Harry says, quote, he said I was clearly struggling and he was worried about me. I thanked him for his concern, assured him I was fine. I'd become emotional in front of a room full of sick kids and their folks just after becoming a father myself. Nothing abnormal about that. He said I wasn't well. He said again that I needed help. I reminded him that I was doing therapy. In fact, he'd recently told me he wanted to accompany me to a session because he suspected I was being, quote, brainwashed. Yeah, here, now we get more into the family abuse. Very common in a family where abuse is happening is once somebody in the family starts to seek support and starts to actually have better mental health and do things that are better for them because they're breaking out of that conditioning, the people within that abusive system will start to question the sanity of the person who's actually in a better mental state. Like he said, William is starting to believe that Harry is brainwashed by his own therapist, that he's learning bad things, that he's being manipulated in some way. When everything that Harry is portraying is showing that he's in a better mental place, he has more control over his emotions, he's in a happier space, William is taking that as a sign that he's not well. He's mentally not right. He's brainwashed. And that's a way for family members to scapegoat somebody that is trying to put their foot down against abuse. It's basically saying because you're speaking out so much, because you won't do what we're telling you to do, or because you're going against what we've been conditioned to do your whole life, there's something wrong with you. There's something mentally unwell with you, and you're not to be trusted. It's using mental health against Harry. It's using his mental health against him when he's actually doing what's best for his mental health, by saying that the things that he's doing because he has a better perspective on his mental health, there's somehow a sign that he's doing something wrong, that he's being brainwashed. He said they got into a texting argument that lasted for like 72 hours. Again, William, whenever he goes into these like weird rages, just can't seem to like stop. He just drags out these long arguments with Harry. And Harry notes, quote, "Now and then I realized that my worst fear was coming true. After months of therapy, after working hard to become more aware, more independent, I was a stranger to my older brother. He could no longer relate to me, tolerate me." He definitely paints this with like a real degree of sadness. He says that he still looks at this text exchange between him and William sometimes and just thinks like, where did it all go wrong? Why did it have to be this way? And it's just really tragic. He seems to really like mourn that loss of his brother, and that his brother doesn't seem to be able to understand what he's trying to say to him anymore. Like, I think Harry is really trying to like reach out to him and get him to understand things or get him to see a different perspective. And William just rages and lashes out at him anytime Harry tries to get him to see a different way or see a different perspective, to become more aware. Chapter 72, Meghan and Harry are really thinking about escape. How are they gonna get out of this goddamn mess? He says they reached out to a friend who had a house that they could borrow on Vancouver Island, and they decided to go over there for a little bit to sort of clear their minds. They said they loved it. They felt like they were a part of the community. People weren't stalking and harassing them all the time. It felt like they were living a normal life and they got to enjoy time with Archie. But then 6 weeks later, the Daily Mail printed their address and blasted it out to the whole world. Of course, this means that the paparazzi descends on them and starts making their life a living hell yet again.
There wasn't a single paparazzi that lives on Vancouver Island. That was the reason we chose it. It's an island.
That's another one there. Paparazzi vehicle.
No one in their right mind would have to deal with this endlessly. The toll was visible. The emotional toll that it was having on both of us, but especially my wife. What are we going to do? We're going to have to change this for our own sake.
Like, let's really think this through.
How are we going to do this? How are we going to change our relationship with the institution, but in a way that protects us and our mental health and our well-being as well?
They're back to having to pull the blinds closed, close every door, every window, yet again feeling like prisoners in their own home. But he says that this got them thinking about this potential idea of moving to a Commonwealth country to avoid the royal rota aspect of the job, but still being able to take on duties for the Queen. I think this makes a lot of sense to them at this moment because whenever they've gone on these royal tours, that's when they tend to receive the least harassment, is when they just get to focus on the royal duty aspect of things. Because when they go to these engagements and events, people react really positively to them. They have a good time. The crowds are really engaged with them. So to them, I think it makes a lot of sense. Why don't we cut out this whole like royal rota drama sort of thing where the tabloids are constantly like nitpicking us, harassing us, trying to pit us against other family members, and just focus on the work, just focus on doing the life of service part of the royal family. They had come up with 2 plans in the past to do this. The first was to go to New Zealand, and then the second one was to move to South Africa. They said the second plan was even signed off by the Queen, and they were about ready to move on with this plan when his father asked him to put it in writing. Then within a few days, it was all over the papers. Once it gets in the papers, then the media spin starts, and that obviously makes it impossible for them to go through with that plan because there's all sorts of hullabaloo about it.
And the palace signed off on us moving to South Africa. So my father's office knew about it, my brother's office knew about it, and my grandmother's office knew about it. No one else knew. It was very much an internal document. Then it was leaked to the Times newspaper. And then that whole plan was then scrapped because it's now become a public debate. Once plans like that become public debates, 9 times out of 10, it's going to fail.
This time, they're trying to toy with the idea of moving to Canada. He's talking to Charles on the phone. Charles says, you need to put it in writing. Harry's like, no, we did that. Remember when that happened and it got leaked to the press? How are we going to put it in writing? Charles says, quote, I can't help you if you don't put it in writing, darling boy. These things have to go through government. So Harry is like, fucking Jesus Christ. Okay, I'll put it in writing. So he writes up a letter, watermarked, private, confidential, don't leak to the press. He notes in this letter that they're willing to make sacrifices if necessary to make this whole deal go through, including potentially relinquishing their Sussex titles in order to make this happen. He tries to call Charles on the phone. He doesn't respond. He emails Charles, trying to arrange a meeting in person. Charles says that he won't be able to meet with them until the end of January. Keep in mind, this is at the beginning of January 2020. So Charles is basically saying that they have to wait a month in order to meet with him. Charles also responds back to him, quote, you'll be disobeying orders from the monarch and myself if you persist in this course of action before we have a chance to sit down. All right, Charles. All right. Like, what the fuck? Like, chill. Chapter 73. On January 3rd, Harry calls up the Queen. He says, I'm really hoping that we can meet in person to talk about this arrangement. He asks, is she free? She says, yes, of course. I'm free all week. Come whenever. January 5th. Meghan and Harry get on a plane. They're ready to go, meet with her at Sandringham. Suddenly, they get a message that the Queen is no longer available for a meeting. They're told that basically they cannot get a meeting this month. And if they cannot get a meeting, then this plan is not going to go forward.
Before we left, spoke to my grandmother as well and told her that we're coming back on the 6th and I would love to come and drive up and come and see you. She knew that we were finding things hard. I'd spoken to her many times about it. She told me that she had no plans for the week. And she said, well, why don't you come up and intend to have tea, but why don't you stay the night, you and Meghan?
So we were flying back from Vancouver straight to Heathrow. And so right as we're getting on the plane, this urgent message comes through to H saying, you are not allowed to go and see Her Majesty. Make sure that your principal is aware. He cannot go and see her. And she's busy. She has plans all week.
I was like, wow, that's certainly the opposite to what she had told me. Once we were back in the UK, I rang her and I said, I'm now told that you're busy. And she goes, yes, I didn't know that I was busy. I've been told that I'm busy. I've actually been told that I'm busy all week. I was like, wow.
Once they finally do get to Sandringham, Harry calls up his grandmother again and says, hey, you told me you were free this whole week. Like, what's going on? She says, something came up that I wasn't aware of. Her voice was strange. Can I pop in tomorrow then, Granny? Well, I'm busy all week. At least, she added, that was what the bee told her. Is he in the room with you, Granny? No answer. Again, elder abuse. Like, the Queen was clearly being manipulated by all of these, like, men in gray suits in the firm in her old age, to the point where Harry can't even see his own grandmother. Like, there's so much bureaucracy blocking him from seeing his own family. Chapter 74, they get word from their head of comms that the Sun is going to run with this story, that they're going to leave before they've had a chance to agree on everything or meet. I think the, quote, sad little man from the Sun that they're talking about is Piers Morgan, but I could be wrong. But Harry is pretty sure that he's going to try and get this story out there as quickly as possible, working in concert with the palace to get ahead and spin the story. Harry doesn't want that to happen. He doesn't want them to spin this story before they've even gotten a chance to figure out what the hell is going on. So Harry feels like they have to rush out a statement right away before the media gets wind of this. So he calls the Queen, he tells her what they've learned, and he said she'd allowed it as long as, quote, it didn't add to the speculation. They're trying to think about how to craft this statement, but it's too late. The Sun has already run with it. Harry says, quote, as expected, the story depicted our departure as a rollicking, carefree, hedonistic tapping out, rather than a careful retreat, an attempt at self-preservation. It also included the telling detail that we'd offered to relinquish our Sussex titles. There was only one document on Earth in which that detail was mentioned, my private and confidential letter to my father.
It became clear that the institution leaked the fact that we were going to be moving back to Canada. And the key piece of that story that made me aware that the contents of the letter between me and my father had been leaked was that we were willing to relinquish our Sussex titles. That was the giveaway. And I was like, wow. Like, our story, our life literally got taken from underneath us.
So they work for days and days trying to get this statement, trying to figure out what exactly they're going to say, trying to get the wording exactly right. Finally, they put it up on their Instagram. He says it's the only platform that was available to them. And they don't have like any other social media really. So they put it on Instagram and they're kind of like, it's done. It's out there now. They knew that it was going to be the talk of everything. They just kind of braced themselves for the impact of what's going to happen. Chapter 75. Finally, it's time for them to meet about the actual arrangement of this stepping back. He says, on the way to this meeting, he got a text from Marco that, quote, Willie was declaring that he and I were now, quote, separate entities. I've put my arm around my brother all our lives and I can't do that anymore. What part in all of this was William putting his arm around his brother? At what point was that happening? It's just a complete rewriting of history. Just because Harry didn't want to divorce Meghan on William's orders doesn't mean that William was a supportive brother in all of this. Everybody in the royal family thinks that when people don't listen to them or do what they want them to do, that somehow that reflects badly on the other person. When it's really like, you can say whatever you want, but people don't have to listen to you. Just really sad and horrible. Not a great way to go into this meeting. So at this meeting is Harry, William, Charles, the Queen, the Bee, and the Wasp.
I had to get back because Archie was in Canada.
And it was only once Meg had left and gone back to Canada that it was then arranged that there was going to be a meeting at Sandringham on the following Monday.
Imagine a conversation, a roundtable discussion about the future of your life when the stakes are this high, and you as the mom and the wife and the target, in many regards, aren't invited to have a seat at the table.
It was clear to me that they planned it so that you weren't in the room.
He said when he walked in there, William looked like he was ready to murder him. He was really not in a good mood. Harry starts off the meeting by talking about the press. He says, quote, I referenced their cruel and criminal behavior, but said they'd had a ton of help. The family had enabled the papers by looking the other way or by actively courting them, and some of the staff had worked directly with the press, briefing them, planting stories, occasionally rewarding and feting them. The press was a big part of why we'd come to this crisis. Their business model demanded that we be in constant conflict, but they weren't the only culprits. He said he looked at Willie in this moment, hoping that William would back him up with this, considering that recently he was just complaining about Charles and Camilla briefing against him and causing that sort of strife in his own life. He's looking for William to back him up in this moment. Instead, William just starts complaining that the press is making it sound like it's his fault that Harry and Meghan are leaving, and that's why he's mad. They cannot see the forest for the trees. William, why do you think that story is playing out? It's probably coming from inside the house, right? It's probably coming from Charles and Camilla's team to put the blame of Harry and Meghan leaving on William so that people don't speculate that it's coming from Charles and Camilla. Again, he cannot even see, what is the most likely scenario for why he's being treated that way. So they're there to discuss 5 different options for them leaving. It sounds like option 1 goes from all in to option 5 being all out. He said option 3 was a compromise. It was a half in, half out scenario, like they'd been discussing previously. This idea of we work for the Queen, we have royal duties, we have some royal engagements that we do, but we're just not engaged in the royal rota aspect of it. Maybe we live further abroad.
We've got a plan.
What if we move to Canada?
We thought it would be good to give ourselves some breathing space, but also we were really passionate about continuing our work throughout the Commonwealth to support the Queen
Well, and also I think what's important is the pack of the Royal Rota is based there in London. So if we're not there, they can't cover what we're doing. You guys can be on the front pages of all the papers, you can have it exactly the way you want it, and we can just go about doing the work in the name of the Queen.
If you want us to go and do things on behalf of the Queen, we'll go and do it. And we'll pay for it ourselves. We don't want to be dependent on any taxpayer funding. Guess what? You get us, but you get us for free. And this was years in the making. We really wanted to remove the supposed public interest argument that the press had over every element of our lives. Their argument was if you have even 1% of public funding any part of your life, then we can basically claim public interests. We can invade your privacy on everything because you have public funds supporting you.
Harry also notes the one thing that he went into this conversation caring about the most was security. He wanted to make sure that he, Meghan, and his children would keep their security because he was worried about his family's physical safety. Remember, they still get tons of death threats, tons of people coming up to them, harassing them. So as they're discussing the options, the family wants them to take option 1. Just like status quo, put up with it, shut the fuck up, and go back to normal. Everything's fine. He says, barring that, they would only accept option 5. That's total dissolution from the royal family.
But once I got there, I was given 5 options. 1 being all in, no change. 5 being all out. I chose option 3 in the meeting. Half in, half out. Have our own jobs, but also work in support of the Queen. But it became very clear very quickly that that goal was not up for discussion or debate. It was terrifying to have my brother scream and shout at me and my father say things that just simply weren't true, and my grandmother, quietly sit there and sort of take it all in. But you have to understand that from the family's perspective, especially from hers, there are ways of doing things, and her ultimate sort of mission, goal / responsibility is the institution.
Now, why is that bad? Because option 5 would mean that they would have no security whatsoever. They would just be completely kicked out of the family, no support, no financial support, no security, no engagements, no titles, no nothing. Why is that bad? Well, that's bad because Prince Harry was born into this family. He has had to put his entire life on display for this family. Even if he's not called Prince Harry anymore, he is stuck in it, right? That's how monarchy works. You can't leave the family. You're tied by blood. So with that in mind, he will always have security risks that come with him being out in public. There will always be crazy people that will see him as a target because of his symbolic representation of the monarchy and the royal family. On top of all of that, because of everything that has transpired, the press and the royal family are complicit in amping up that harassment against Harry and Meghan to really high levels of hate. So to say you're completely cut out of this and we're gonna give you nothing is really dangerous for them. Also keep in mind, like Harry has said before, part of the agreement of him putting up with his entire life being on display, being told where to go and what to do and what not to do, was all based on this idea that he was going to be financially supported for the rest of his life. He didn't gain any skills to go get a job. Like he didn't go to university because basically the family told him not to. The family has not prepped him to do anything other than to be a royal. So this complete total dissolution from the family is really not setting him and his family up for success. So they discuss the 5 options, and then suddenly the bee starts handing out drafts of a statement for option 5. And Harry's like, what the fuck? Like, how do you have a draft of this statement written already for option 5 when we haven't decided on option 5? So he was basically like, this is just for show. This was for no reason. You just wanted to invite me here to coerce me into going with this option 5. He said, were there drafts of any of the other options, of any of the other statements? And the B is like, yes, of course there's other drafts for all the other options. So Harry is like, can I see them then? Like, let's see the statements. And he's like, my printer is out of ink. Shucks. Darn it. I can't print them. The printer's not working. Harry's like, you fucking idiot. Like, this is some bullshit. Harry is at a point where he's like, I really just don't even care what option we go with right now. All I want is security. All I want is protection. He says, quote, I pleaded for continuation of the same armed police protection I'd had and needed since birth. I'd never been allowed to go anywhere without 3 armed bodyguards, even when I was supposedly the most popular member of the family. And now I was the target, along with my wife and son, of unprecedented hate. And the leading proposal under discussion called for total abandonment. He then says he's offering to pay for security out of his own pocket. He says, quote, look, please, Meg and I don't care about perks. We care about working, serving, and staying alive. So basically, they don't seem to get very far with this meeting, but they come to a basic general agreement that they were going to sort out this in a transitionary period over the next 12 months, during which they would continue to receive security, and then they could meet again to discuss more of the granular details of their titles and their responsibilities and all of that stuff. They all walk out. Harry walks past the B's office and he's like, looks like that printer is working to me, you fucking cunt. So the B literally just lied straight to his face. Again, this idea that like they all work in the monarchy and so you would expect them to believe that these people are like from God. It's just total nonsense. Like they show no deference to them whatsoever. Okay, my camera keeps dying and my computer is like a mess and I've recorded this like 3 different times, okay? So like, I apologize if I'm like rushing through and getting really frustrated because I am getting really frustrated. All right, let's finish this up, baby. We're so close. We are at the very beginning of the very end. The total unraveling of Harry and Meghan fleeing to Canada is emerging, okay? Chapter 76, it starts off with the lines, I jumped into the car and was immediately told that a strongly worded denial had been put out by the palace, squashing this morning's bullying story. The denial was signed by none other than me and Willie. My name was attached by faceless other words I'd never even seen, let alone approved. I was stunned.
And once I got in the car after the meeting, I was told about a joint statement that had been put out in my name and my brother's name, squashing the story about him bullying us out of the family.
A sign of public unity from the brothers, who issued a joint statement calling the report false, offensive, and potentially harmful.
I couldn't believe it. No one had asked me. No one had asked me permission to put my name to a statement like that. And I rang Em and I told her, and she burst into floods of tears because within 4 hours they were happy to lie to protect my brother. And yet, for 3 years, they were never willing to tell the truth to protect us.
This was really the total unraveling, I think, for Harry, because the entire time, they've just been asking the palace to put out statements that are in support of him and Meghan and will calm down and quell all of the harassment that they're getting. Like, not asking for much, like asking for a statement from the palace that's like, racism is bad, okay? And the palace has been super wary of putting out anything, this whole never complain, never explain idea. They've been so hesitant to defend them in any situations where they've asked for support. And then suddenly, William is mad that he might get blamed for Harry and Meghan leaving, and then the palace is more than happy to just rush out a statement saying that everything's fine, the brothers are fine, they're cool, without Harry having any knowledge of this whatsoever. It's the palace clearly playing favorites, right? Because William is the heir, they feel like they have to protect his reputation at all costs, and Harry and Meghan can be sacrificed if necessary at this point. I think this felt like a big stab in the back, right as they were on their way out. The palace formally comments on the fact that they are leaving or stepping back from their responsibilities, but nobody really knows what that means at this point. They still don't really know where their security fits in all of this, what their titles fit in all this. As soon as the palace officially comments on them leaving, the media starts their whole new spin cycle again. The Daily Mail even wrote, quote, "expect no mercy." Harry makes a great observation here, quote, "Clearly this is more than simple anger. These men and women saw me as an existential threat. If our leaving posed a threat to the monarchy, as some were saying, then it posed a threat to all those covering the monarchy for a living. Hence, we had to be destroyed." It's all about protecting these people's jobs, right? They want to keep that attachment to royalty and their connection to this highfalutin society. The money that they get from writing their stupid biographies and op-eds and all of that stuff, they don't want that to end. And right now, Harry and Meghan stepping back from the royal family, it's calling like everything about monarchy into question here. And it's freaking everybody out. Harry's basically insinuating that the reason why they're getting attacked so viciously in the press is to protect the entire institution of monarchy and just the concept of monarchy, and has nothing to do with them as people. Spin coming out of the media is twofold. The first piece of spin is that, one, they didn't tell the Queen that they were going to step back. This is just patently false. They've been talking with the palace and multiple people in the institution about leaving. They've had multiple plans about leaving. This did not blindside the Queen like it's been reported, but they all want to report it as if Harry and Meghan just like hit post on Instagram and suddenly they were out of the royal family, didn't talk to anyone, didn't speak to anybody, when in fact, that's just patently not the case. And two, they want to start commenting on Harry and Meghan's wedding, basically making the argument that we as the taxpayers spent so much money on you guys. Shouldn't you be grateful? Shouldn't you be happy when you've spent all of this taxpayer money and lived this extravagant life? How dare you leave, basically. And Harry is like, one, the taxpayers did not pay for the royal wedding. The family paid for the wedding. It's really hard with the royal family because they have taxpayer money that they get, but they also just have a shit ton of their own money, right? From exploitation and stealing things and enslaving people. Like, they have their own personal wealth. So the wedding wasn't paid for by the taxpayer. What was paid for by the taxpayer was their security at the wedding. And Harry notes that the reason why their security was so out of control at their wedding was because they were getting so many death threats, so many threats. And why were they getting so many threats? Because the press was like whipping up people into like a race war or a class war over Meghan. So the press are complaining about how much they spent on security at their wedding, when the only reason why they had to spend that much security is because they're actively encouraging people to harass them in ways that are really dangerous, like racism. The end of the chapter ends with Harry kind of talking about like the idea of the cost of the monarchy and whether like the British public gets something for the money that they invest into the monarchy. It's an interesting discussion. I disagree with Harry, but let's see. He says, maybe money sits at the heart of every controversy about monarchy. Britain has long had trouble making up its mind. Many support the crown, but many also feel anxious about the cost. That anxiety is increased by the fact that the cost is unknowable. Depends on who's crunching the numbers. Does the crown cost taxpayers? Yes. Does it also pay a fortune into government coffers? Also yes. Does the crown generate tourism income that benefits all? Of course. Does it also rest upon lands obtained and secured when the system was unjust and wealth was generated by exploited workers and thuggery, annexation, and enslaved people? Can anyone deny it? He also makes a note that he thinks that the monarchy is like a return on investment for the taxpayers, but he also understands, he's like, I'm a prince. I know that nobody wants to hear me like say that the monarchy is good actually, so I'm gonna shut the fuck up and like leave that to the experts. I think it's interesting hearing Harry's perspective on this. I think that he still has a little bit of like the monarchy monarchy propaganda that the monarchy is actually like a net benefit on the British people. Harry has said before he's not an anti-monarchist. He still believes in the concept of monarchy. And based on this excerpt here, I think that he has a lot of misconceptions about how much the monarchy is actually beneficial to the British taxpayer. Like, do they actually get something out of it? The idea that the crown generates a lot of tourism for Britain is something that is brought up a lot as a reason to keep the monarchy, but the numbers just don't add up there, okay? There are plenty of countries that have gotten rid of their monarchies that have good tourism industries related to things that were previously owned or controlled by the monarchy. France is a great example of this, right? France does not have a monarchy, but nobody is like, I'm not gonna go to Versailles because there aren't any living monarchs there. Like, that's just ridiculous, and this is like British propaganda, okay?
Annoying though they might be to the locals by blocking the tube and refusing to stand on the right, they dump buckets of money on the UK to see the sights, travel ludicrously short distances by public transport, and generally act silly a long way from home. Sure, not everything they come to see is royal, but the most expensive stuff is. And who are the biggest spenders? The Yanks. After they finish buying maple syrup and cheap pharmaceuticals, Tijuana professional services, and illegal pharmaceuticals, where do they go next? The United Kingdom. Americans fly across an ocean to see a land filled with castles that aren't plastic. And why do the Americans think France's castles are so boring and stinky and the UK's castles are so awesome? Because real monarchs still use them.
There's a lot to talk about right here. Where to start? So the comparison with France is particularly audacious and cheeky here because, as you might know, France makes a lot more money off tourism than the UK. In 2017, France was the #1 tourist destination in the world, whereas the United Kingdom was 7th with less than half of the number of individual tourists. The Palace of Versailles gets vastly more visitors each year than Buckingham Palace. According to a CNN travel report, in 2013, Versailles had over 7 million visitors, and Buckingham Palace had less than 1 million. So living monarchs don't seem to be that big of a tourist attraction. Also, as a little aside here, when CGP Grey says, why do Americans think France's castles are so boring and stinky and the UK's castles are so awesome, he shows pictures of 2 castles. Now, the boring and stinky castle is the fortress of Najac in France, and the awesome castle is Mont Saint-Michel in, no prizes for guessing this one, France. They're both French castles. Well, actually, this one isn't a castle, but, you know, whatever. They're both in France. What CGP Grey has done is mix up this place with this place, St. Michael's Mount, which has a similar name and appearance, but is actually in the UK. Now, given that CGP Grey, an American, can't tell the difference between a French castle and an English one, that kind of disproves his point there.
It's also interesting because this is the only time that Harry actually really thinks to defend the monarchy, and it's always in this idea of a cost-benefit analysis. But there's so much more to understanding whether you should be pro or anti-monarchy. One positive aspect is that Harry is willing to admit on the record that yes, the monarchy has enslaved people and exploited workers in order to generate their wealth. He recognizes that kind of inequality. But the other reason why the monarchy is bad is also just because it still propagates this idea that one, people should be born into a governmental system. They are still a part of the government, and the idea that we should have a government in which people are born into it or that people are destined to govern us is bad. It's just a bad idea. It also perpetuates the idea that some people are just born better than others, which is rooted in white supremacy. It's rooted in scientific racism. It's rooted into all sorts of bad stuff that's anti-democratic. So I wish Harry hadn't focused too much on this cost-benefit analysis type thing about the monarchy, because there's just so many things wrong with that argument. And at the end of the day, there's no amount of money that the royal family could generate for the British public that would make the idea that people are naturally born better than other people. There's no amount of money that's going to make that whole system right. On top of all of that, the entire book is basically a representation of why monarchy is bad for the people inside of it, right? Because in order for it to continue, They have to create a fucking cult to keep people inside the system. So it's just clearly bad all around. It's an interesting part, but I think that Harry is just fundamentally wrong about the sort of pros and cons of monarchy. The pros that he mentions are not really pros and are basically like monarchist propaganda. And the cons that he mentions are very big cons, like the wealth that we generated for generations is built on the backs of enslaved people. Chapter 77. So now that they understand that they are going to be stepping back, they have to make the decision, where are we stepping back to? What is that going to look like? They still have the idea of moving to Canada, so they're starting to look around for houses. As they're looking around for housing, Harry and Meg are talking about security, and Meghan asks, would the royal family ever remove their security? Harry is like, no, hell no, they would never do that. He says, quote, never, not in this climate of hate, and not after what happened to my mother. Also, not in the wake of my Uncle Andrew. He was embroiled in a shameful scandal, accused of the sexual assault of a young woman, and no one had so much as suggested that he lose his security. Whatever grievances people had against us, sex crimes wasn't on the list. So Harry again is trying to believe that the royal family will act rationally in this situation because he knows that the royal family gets this bad rap for like killing Diana, right? So to him, it would make no sense for their security to be removed because the royal family knows how much danger they are in. They know the consequences if they don't have security because they've seen how much of a risk that they are. And so Harry, thinking rationally, is like, no, they would never remove our security because if they removed our security, there's the potential that we will be targeted by racists and killed. And then the royal family is going to have to deal with this whole they killed Diana thing all over again with us. So like, it doesn't make sense that they would try to put us in danger when they don't have to. Two, we're in the middle of the whole Prince Andrew scandal, and nobody is talking about removing Prince Andrew's security. In fact, at this time, the royal family is thinking about paying his legal fees. To them, on a rational level, they're like, when you're talking about pedophile or us, why would they remove our security? Like, we haven't done anything other than stepping back from our like responsibilities in London. To Harry, it just doesn't make any sense. But the royal family is not acting rationally. They are just in full-on destroy mode. They get a call. Their security is being pulled. This is in February 2020. Their head of security says that the entire team is being pulled and forced to evacuate by the end of March.
Decided that our security would be removed on the 31st of March, thereby leaving me less than 3 weeks to find security for my family. And I'm worried. I am genuinely concerned for the safety of my family.
And then just like that, this thing called COVID.
Officials now say more than 400 people have been sickened.
And at that moment, our location was exposed. We knew our security was being pulled. Everyone in the world knew where we were, so we weren't going to be safe there.
They both seem pretty stunned by this decision. Harry notes, quote, the threat level for us was still higher than that for nearly every other royal, equal to that assigned the Queen, and yet the word had come down and there was to be no arguing. They are literally the two royals in the most danger, aside from the Queen, who has the symbolic significance of literally being the monarch, and they're deciding that they have to pull their security. Harry's like, let me start calling my family. He tries to call his dad won't pick up the phone. Then Willie texts him and says, can you talk? So Harry's like, okay, finally, let me talk to my brother. They got on the phone and William says, quote, it was a government decision, nothing to be done. Now, this is some bullshit for a few reasons, okay? One, the royal family is in the government. Like, what is this whole play like? It's a government decision. They are in the government. So, like, again, they're just, like, so deluded into, like, believing they're not a part of the government. Two, So the royal security decisions, as we've learned like from some of the lawsuits that have come out recently, royal security is determined by a group called RAVEC. It's a government organization, but in part it is run by members of the institution who decide how much security each member gets, when they have to get it, organizing all of their security. So RAVEC is like directly controlled by the firm. So for Willie to get on the phone and be like, oh, this is a government decision, nothing can be done here, it's like the institution has an active role in determining what RAVEC says. So you'll just notice like William loves just blaming other people when he has an active role and could help in stopping it. As the future heir, he does have a voice in this decision. He just wants to blame the government or somebody else for making decisions that he could help with. Chapter 78, as their security is being pulled, Harry gets in touch with the palace and asks like, how am I gonna have security? So the palace provides him a security firm to call up, and they quote him a price of £6 million. Harry like sheepishly hangs up the phone and is like, how the hell am I going to afford $6 million a year in security? This is right as he's got the news that Caroline Flack has taken her own life because of press harassment. Plus, the pandemic is starting, and they're worried that the border to Canada is going to close. So Harry and Meghan are in like full panic mode. How are they going to stay safe? They're worried about their location being outed again in Canada. Just everything goes wrong at once.
Everything goes wrong at once. Nobody wants to help me, and I'm dying.
Chapter 79, Meghan is talking to one of her good friends, Tyler Perry. Now, Tyler Perry is the good guy of the whole book. He is the one superhero of the entire book. I was not expecting this, but Tyler Perry, I'm not a huge fan of his work, but Tyler Perry just comes across as a good dude, as a good, honest dude that's kind and generous and just full of just common sense and love. I just didn't think I was gonna love Tyler Perry as much as I did in this moment, because he's just the only person in the book and in the documentary that makes any goddamn sense and wants to like help them out. Harry says they were talking to Tyler Perry, they were trying to put on a brave face, but Tyler Perry is like, what's wrong, what's going on? And so they kind of like info dump him with everything about their security being pulled and how scared they are and stuff. And so he offers for them to stay at his house because he's going to be working on a project. He says, I've got security there, you'll be safe there, just until you get some time to get back on your feet and figure out everything. They said it felt like it was really generous, but they also felt like they were eagerly going to take this generosity because they just had nowhere else to go. No idea, no clue what they were going to do next. So right before the Canadian border closed, they hop on a plane, they get over to Tyler Perry's house to spend their pandemic. Harry asks Tyler Perry why he's doing this. Tyler Perry responds, my mother loved your mother. I was caught completely by surprise. He said, after your mother visited Harlem, that was it. She could do no wrong in Maxine Perry's book. I think that's really sweet. Tyler Perry also makes another note about his mother in the documentary.
You know, the most that I knew about the royal family was around Princess Diana's death.
Mom, can we just have one more 2 seconds, please?
There's a moment that I'll never forget where she's walking through the airport and she has a tennis racket in front of her face and she's trying to get away from the press and they're all over her. And I realized that after the marriage ended, she was thrown to the wolves.
Out. O-U-T, out. Have a nice trip now.
So to tell Meghan that I felt her feelings were valid hurt. I didn't want to have to say that to her. I didn't want her to feel that. But I didn't want to lie to her. She was afraid of them destroying her or going crazy or them making her think she was crazy.
British public opinion is that it's all Meghan's fault.
She's a controlling woman.
Lloyds have turned.
I saw my mother be abused for years. I knew the symptoms. I knew what it was like. And I was like, Tyler, how dare you compare this to the abuse of your mother? This woman was abused, and so was he.
Tyler Perry is one of the only people in this whole story that is willing to call everything that's going on abuse, because that's what it is. Tyler Perry is really, he's just the true hero of this story. Chapter 80, they're just hanging out at Tyler Perry's house during the pandemic, living a pretty normal life. No one knows that they're there. It's great. Archie takes his first steps at Tyler Perry's house, and Harry says, quote, "I thought for a moment how nice it would be to share the news with Grandpa and Uncle Willie." Even when his family has completely and totally abandoned him, he's still longing for these moments, these just familial moments, sharing time together as a family, even when his family has just completely treated him like dirt. Chapter 81, while they're at Tyler Perry's house, their location is outed to the media yet again. He says it took exactly 6 weeks, the same as it had when their location was outed in Canada. Caps are suddenly swarming, cutting into the fence, trying to sneak onto the property. Just an absolute nightmare in the area.
It's almost 5 in the morning. Archie's waking up. Because this.
Oh my God, they're just circling. What is wrong with these people?
I've been in that house for many, many, many years, and across the canyon are all these other, celebrities, and no one had seen an assault like this.
Is my mom outside with Archie?
With helicopters 24/7.
The second one today.
Drones flying over it. We would go up every day, and the chain link on the fence would be cut, and people would sneak in onto my property. I had to put all the cameras up on the hill there, had to plant more trees. It was crazy.
So this signals to them they're going to have to flee again. They have to start looking into security teams. And right as they're trying to work all of that out, it turns out that Prince Charles has cut Harry off financially. Now, I don't think I can explain how bad this is other than just reading Harry's own words, so I'm going to read Harry's own words. He said, quote, "I recognize the absurdity, a man in his mid-30s being financially cut off by his father. But Pa wasn't merely my father. He was my boss, my banker, my comptroller, keeper of the purse strings throughout my adult life. Cutting me off therefore meant firing me without redundancy pay and casting me into the void after a lifetime of service. More, after a lifetime of rendering me otherwise unemployable. I felt fatted for the slaughter, suckled like a veal calf. I'd never asked to be financially dependent on Pa. I'd been forced into this surreal state, this unending Truman Show in which I almost never carried money, never owned a car, never carried a house key, never once ordered anything online, never received a single box from Amazon, almost never traveled on the underground. Once I'd eaten on a theater trip. Sponge, the papers called me, but there's a big difference between being a sponge and being prohibited from learning independence. After decades of being rigorously and systematically infantilized, I was now abruptly abandoned and mocked for being immature, for not standing on my own 2 feet. I know a lot of people don't want to hear this whole well, my father cut me off when he's a 30-year-old man, like he says in the book. But you have to realize, this is a massive amount of financial abuse, right? Harry's entire financial security has been based on his father. He doesn't know any other way. The whole system works in that his father controls his finances. His father controls his money. He's never had access to that his whole life, and he's never asked for access to it because that's how the system works. That's how the system is created. And then he was kept in this cult where he wasn't allowed to learn all of the basics of being an independent person. Your parents have a responsibility to you to teach you to be an independent adult that can survive in the world. But because he was being groomed to be in the royal family and to be royal for his job, he wasn't given any of those skills to live on his own, to find a job. He didn't go to university. He didn't study to like some sort of technical skill. He wasn't even like given money and said like, here, learn how to budget your whole life. Harry was basically being paid by his father to be in the public eye. He was being paid for basically his entire life being on display from birth. Like he said before, that was the deal. His phone is literally being hacked. His father is literally briefing to the tabloids that he's like a drug addict. He went to the army because his father didn't want him to do any of the things that he asked to do. Like, he did everything that the institution groomed him to do and told him to do, with the understanding that he was going to be financially secure for the rest of his life. Now he's being thrown to the side of the road with no skills, no money, no understanding of how the outside world works, and then is having to suffer the abuse of the media, basically saying, well, you're a spoiled little man-child. You are not mature enough, when he's been denied that ability to grow. It is very similar to cults. Let's say you're in a cult that's very patriarchal. A lot of women in those cults are being told their whole life that their only role in life is to be a wife and mother. And yet then those women will escape the cult, maybe as an adult, and realize that they have been groomed into not having any employable skills, having never gone to university, having always been financially dependent on another person, and also not having a lot of the same cultural and social aspects that other people have grown up with, because they might have been sheltered in what information and what TV and movies and stuff they had access to.
Why didn't I just leave? I didn't have a car. Uber and Lyft weren't a thing then. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. I had no idea how to live in the world. I thought maybe I could live on the streets until somehow I could get a job. Where would I have gone without help from anyone? Leaving a cult is hard because you don't have access to any help from outside of the group. If you talk about leaving, you're shamed and you're looked down upon for even considering leaving. I didn't know how to live or function outside of these ideas that were forced upon me, and simply leaving wasn't an option.
Shortly after my 18th birthday, I squirreled a little bit of money away, just enough for a ticket, and jumped on a bus at 5 a.m. in the morning back to London, and landed at my nan's house, and asked her if she could take me in, and she said yes, but you have to get a job. And I'm like, what's that?
The idea of leaving the cult and going into that world is very terrifying.
I remember being scared to cross the street because I was afraid that, you know, God would take my life.
It's difficult also because you're not used to making your own decisions.
About 7 or 8 years ago, I was in like a book club, and it was triggering because it was like, what do you think of this book? And I was just getting agitated, and I could barely get a word out, and I just stopped going.
People I loved, something I believed in, was suddenly proven to be just a delusion, you know? So you kind of hate yourself for that.
It's going to be exhausting, and hopefully the person will have a safe place to put their life together.
Harry is coming out in exactly the same way. The institution specifically didn't set him up for success, like the success that we normal people would assume. And then he's getting judged for it. And yet when we talk about women that have escaped cults and have been groomed into basically being young wives and mothers with no other skills, when they escape, we're very sympathetic to that because we understand that they were specifically controlled in that way. And yet with Harry, I think especially because he's a man, people are not willing to give him that grace and instead are willing to abuse him because of the outcomes of the abuse that he's already suffered, the financial abuse that he's already suffered. And that's really sad. 82, they finally find a house. They move in around July 2020. Meghan is pregnant at this time, but she is also still in the midst of a fight with the Daily Mail surrounding that letter that she sent to her father that the Mail published. There's been all sorts of stress with this lawsuit. The Daily Mail this time is basically trying to make the argument that because Some of Meghan's friends had made comments to People magazine and said that Meghan wrote a letter. So their argument is that because they're friends with Meghan, Meghan must have sent them to specifically talk about the letter to People magazine, which I don't know. I can't. This legal case doesn't make sense.
I knew the stress the latest development was having on Meghan, and that was that the Mail were going to argue that Meghan's friends had already spoken about the letter to People magazine and that Meghan had authorised that interview, which she hadn't.
Meghan is going to deny any involvement in interviews given by 5 of her friends to People magazine.
I don't know how many pages the article itself was, but within it, there were, I think, a few sentences that pertained to my father and the fact that I'd reached out to him.
We all knew that Meghan had written her father a letter. I did not catch in that People magazine story that someone mentioned the letter.
It was this People story that referenced Thomas Markle's letter and prompted him to share it with the Mail on Sunday.
You even do something in total love, and that is for good, and they find one piece, and then it becomes this whole other thing.
They ran the false claim that Meghan had authorised this interview with People magazine, so the argument was she had therefore given up all rights, anything to do with the letter whatsoever.
But Meghan knows that this is just a ploy for her friends to be exposed so that they could be harassed by the media. So she has all this stress trying to protect her friends and trying to deal with the lawsuit. So the day that they finally move into their new house, Meghan collapses on the floor. They rush to the hospital. It turns out Meghan had a miscarriage. Harry writes, "In my life, I've felt totally helpless only 4 times. In the back of the car while Mummy and Willie and I were being chased by Paps. In the Apache after Afghanistan, unable to get clearance to do my duty. At Notcott when my pregnant wife was planning to take her life. And now." Harry, I believe to this day, still partially blames the Mail, and this lawsuit in particular, for the miscarriage.
Now, do we absolutely know that the miscarriage was caused by that? Of course we don't. But bearing in mind the stress that caused, the lack of sleep, and the timing of the pregnancy, how many weeks in she was, I can say from what I saw, that miscarriage was created by what they were trying to do to her.
Chapter 83, this is Christmas of 2020. Harry says that at this time they're starting to sign a bunch of corporate partnerships. We know these as the deals with like Netflix and Spotify. I know they don't have a deal with Spotify anymore, but I cannot get into the Spotify stuff right now. Okay, listen to Lady Audacity. That was really good. That was a good take. Okay, Lady Audacity's episode on the Spotify thing. And he says specifically that they would, quote, "give us the chance to resume our work, to spotlight the causes we cared about, to tell the stories we felt were vital, and to pay for our security." Harry is just like, look, we have to make a living somehow, right? £6 million a year for our security. We gotta make money. We have to have a job. But no matter what they do for work, the media is always going to spin it that they don't deserve to be in public at all, doing anything, showing their faces in any way, which is really frustrating because they have to have a job. But then when they have a job, people get mad at them for having a job because that job involves creating content. It's just a vicious cycle of hate where the people that are hating on them are not even being rational in their hate. There's a cute little anecdote at the end where Meghan bought an ornament that looks like the Queen to put on their Christmas tree. And then one day while Archie is playing around the tree, the ornament falls and Granny smacks into 1,000,000 pieces. Is it a metaphor? I don't know. Spooky. 84. The palace officially announces that Harry and Meghan basically have nothing other than like a few small royal patronages. Harry notes that they took away all of his military associations. Keep in mind, Harry is one of the only people that actually joined the military. Not like some bullshit, like they learned how to fly some planes and shit, like actually joined the military. So all of his military associations have been taken away from him. So his father and brother can go cosplay in like some stupid military uniform and wear like a bajillion badges on their chest that they didn't fucking earn at all And Harry, an actual war veteran, is being stripped of his military titles. The palace around this time also officially states that they do not work for the Queen anymore. They will no longer do any services for the Queen. Harry notes that the way that they said this made it sound like they had come to an agreement of some kind, but they hadn't. Basically, since the Sandringham Agreement, they have not talked at all about what this dissolution from the royal family will look like. The last thing Harry heard about this was that they had a 12-month transitionary period, and then suddenly their security was pulled. And now suddenly there's this whole wrap up. Oh, now they don't work for the Queen. Oh, now they don't have all these titles anymore. It's like, hold up though. Like, why did you pull their security then when only now are you saying that they don't work for the Queen anymore? Like, they've just done everything in like the wrong order. Why did they pull the security first and foremost? Again, it makes it seem like they wanted something bad to happen, which is a little bit terrifying. After these announcements from the palace, this sets off a whole new string of hate. Harry says, quote, "We were vilified every day, every hour on social media and found ourselves the subjects of scurrilous, wholly fictional stories in the newspapers. Stories always attributed to, quote, royal aides or royal insiders or palace sources. Stories clearly spoon-fed by palace staff and presumably sanctioned by my family." So not only has the palace put out this statement, which was already going to get them a bunch of hate anyway, the palace is also spoon-feeding false narratives to the press to drum up even more hate against them. This is the other part of the royal family and the institution's game here that makes no sense to me. So when the palace puts out these statements saying that Harry and Meghan don't work for them anymore, like that was already going to make people mad. Like they didn't need to sow even more hate. And yet the palace is still feeding things to the media that are creating stories that create that wave of hate. So again, it seems like they are intentionally stoking the fires of something. For what purpose? Like Harry and Meghan are no longer working royals at this point, and the palace is saying that. So there's no need to fight with them or compete with them. So it's a very strange decision from the palace to not only know that their statement was going to give Harry and Meghan more hate, but then to also feed another undercurrent of hate while also holding this bullshit like never complain, never explain. Like they're literally complaining and explaining to all of these other media outlets to specifically target Harry and Meghan when they're literally at this point like just trying to build their life in another country. Harry notes that he's tried to talk to the palace about doing certain things. He said he wasn't really surprised by this because just a couple months earlier he had asked somebody at the palace if they could lay a wreath for him from a Remembrance Day, and he put in the request like multiple times and the palace just denied every single one of his requests. The only person that was willing to lay a wreath for Harry on Remembrance Day was one of his old instructors from Sandhurst. So like they knew that the palace was just not engaging with them whatsoever. The way that the palace is reacting, everything that they do just seems like full of anger. Just full of anger. Like they're just denying Harry's request. He's been a part of this family his whole life, right? Imagine you thought you had a family and then you tried to just do one thing that was going to make you happy and suddenly they're like just denying your calls, denying listening to you, doing basic things for you, like just laying a wreath, you know, like he's doing a nice thing because he's a war veteran. Like they just won't help him in any capacity. It's just fucking brutal. Like he's literally had to work. Like child performance and child display, like for the media, is work. He's literally had to work for this family for his entire life. His entire life. Being basically a child actor. And this is the thanks he gets. Chapter 85, Harry goes to like a woo-woo, like spiritual woman, like a medium or something like that. He does call it out, and then he says that he recognizes, quote, a high percentage chance of humbuggery. But Harry and Meghan are definitely into a lot of this woo-woo spiritualist stuff. I don't believe in mediums. I don't believe in psychics and people that can talk to the dead and spirits and all that stuff. But what I'm gonna say is, like, if it's not hurting anybody and it's not like giving people false hope that their missing child is alive out there or whatever, I don't see the harm in it. It seems like the medium basically told him that his mother's spirit was with him, and like if that gives him some sort of comfort in his life, he already kind of knew that and thought that his mother was with him in spirit anyway, so if he just needs that parroted back to him by some psychic or whatever, like, go for it, bro. It does contain a callback to earlier when the psychic says, quote, your mother says the ornament, she was there. Where? Your mother says something about a Christmas ornament of a mother or a grandmother. It fell, broke. Archie tried to fix it. Your mother says she had a bit of a giggle about that. I think that's a really sweet moment. I think that the metaphor is interesting. I like the idea of the symbolism of Archie as the son of Harry broke the ornament that contained a symbolic representation of the monarchy itself because it was a statue of the Queen. And then when that shattered, this idea that Diana was looking down from above and having a bit of a laugh about that, I think all of the sort of metaphorical significance of that is really interesting. And this idea, it kind of brings in this whole idea of generational curses and like breaking the cycle, breaking out of it. The psychic stuff, okay, yeah, it's a little too woo for me, okay? Chapter 86. So now we're like flashing forward again now. Remember, the beginning of the book, the preface of the book, took place right after Prince Philip's funeral. So now we're back at that moment. This is Harry, William, and Charles walking around Frogmore Gardens after the funeral, talking about where it all went wrong. What happened? What went wrong with all of this? Harry writes, quote, Pa and Willie were still claiming not to know why I'd fled Britain, still claiming not to know anything, and I was getting ready to walk away. Then one of them brought up the press. They asked about my hacking lawsuit. They still hadn't asked about Meg, but they were keen to know how my lawsuit was going because that directly affected them. That's something that is really interesting, this idea that they're so focused on these lawsuits with the press and not so much focused on like why Harry feels aggrieved at all and pretending like they don't understand what Harry is saying. They don't understand why he left when Harry has been explaining to them why he wants to leave. They just don't like what Harry is saying to them because then they would have to like think about and confront what Harry is saying to them. I don't know what this is called. Maybe it's subconscious to them. This seems like a bit of like a tactic of saying that you don't understand why someone thinks something or feels a certain way. But when you say, I don't understand, I think what they're really saying is, I don't think that's valid. William and Charles don't think that what Harry is saying is valid, but that's not the same as not understanding why he feels the way that he feels. They just don't believe it's a good enough reason. But that doesn't mean that they don't know the reason. There's a really great article called The Missing Reasons. Like, Charles and William are giving the missing reasons. Like, they're having this like, I don't understand why Harry is gone. It's like, why don't you explain what the missing reasons are then? Because Harry did tell you. So talking about the lawsuits, Harry says what he's basically been saying within all of the lawsuits recently. That he wants to make this his life mission. He wants to make sure people know that this is criminal behavior. He wants people that have engaged in this criminal behavior to be behind bars. He wants to get justice for this. And he knows that there is hard evidence that they have been conducting illegal information gathering. But Charles and William basically brush him off. Pa allowed that journalists were the scum of the earth, his phrase. But, I snorted, there was always a but with him when it came to the press, because he hated their hate, but oh, how he loved their love. One could make the argument that therein lay the seeds of the whole problem. Indeed, all problems, going back decades. deprived of love as a boy, bullied by schoolmates. He was dangerously, compulsively drawn to the elixir they offered him. He cited Grandpa as a sterling example of why the press wasn't anything to get too vexed about. Poor Grandpa had been abused by the papers for most of his life, but look now! He was a national treasure. The papers couldn't say enough good things about the man. So that's it then? Just wait till we're dead and all will be sorted? The part of this that would infuriate me the most is that Charles and Charles's team are part of all of the problem. Like this idea when he says, oh, Prince Philip was abused by the papers. Prince Philip, okay, there's a whole bunch to unpack here. As with all of these members of the royal family, like they are being abused by the press. Like I'm not saying that that didn't happen, but Prince Philip, the media spin of Prince Philip was basically that he was like a harmless old man that was also like a bit racist. Like he wasn't abused in the same way that Harry and William have been, or even Charles for that matter. Like he wasn't abused in the same way. Whereas Charles is part of active campaigns to brief against his sons, to paint them in the worst possible light in the media so that the media can abuse them so that Charles doesn't get abused. Like he is literally passing on the abuse that the press would give him because he's a shitty person and he doesn't want to deal with the consequences of being a shitty person, you know, causing like Diana, you know, marrying his mistress and all that stuff. So instead, he's basically encouraged the press to attack his own flesh and blood sons so that he doesn't have to be abused. And so like offering Prince Philip as this example of like, oh, he was abused, but then like now look, he's a national treasure. People love him when they're literally at his fucking funeral. Like it's so twisted because Charles should know that he is the one instigating most of the abuse against his sons. As far as I can tell, there were very few people actively briefing against Prince Philip because he was an old-ass man. It's just so sad that Charles is trying to like paint it and spin it as this positive, one day in the future, you will go to heaven and then people will love you. Then you'll be a national treasure. Then you get the glory. When on this earth right now, he is actively complicit in their abuse. He is actively leaking and briefing against them to cause the abuse to happen. It's so messed up. And I cannot tell if Charles is literally psycho or he is trapped in the cult. Like the cult mentality has gotten too far into his brain. Harry writes, I told them I might learn to endure the press and even forgive their abuse. I might, but my own family's complicity, that was going to take longer to get over. Pa's office, Willie's office, enabling these fiends, if not outright collaborating. And as soon as he starts mentioning this idea of the collaboration of the palace, then Charles and William start talking all over each other. Harry, you're crazy. Harry, you're delusional. The idea that once people start putting the pieces together about how the royal family really operates and how complicit they are in their own abuse, that's when all the family members start pointing the idea, you're paranoid, you're delusional, we're not actually in cahoots with the media. It's like Harry has lived in this for 36 odd years. Like, he knows that they are complicit in it. Like, they're acting like he's crazy, but he's literally witness to all of it. He said, quote, even if for the sake of argument, I accepted that Pa and Willie and their staff had never done one overt thing against me or my wife, their silence was an undeniable fact. And that silence was damning and continuing and heartrending. Pa said, you must understand, darling boy, the institution can't just tell the media what to do. Again, I yelped with laughter. It was like Pa saying he couldn't just tell his valet what to do. All the abuse tactics were like deny, attack, reverse victim offender. Actually, you're crazy. Actually, you're the brainwashed one. I don't understand why you didn't leave. This is just basic gaslighting, right? Harry knows that Charles's team leak and brief all the time. They know this for a fact. So one, it's just stupid. It's a bad argument. And 2, they can't break their silence because they can't tell the media what to do. Nobody's asking you to make a statement to tell the media what to do. It's basic support. Even if you don't think it will necessarily change everything, having some words of support would still go a long way. If they put out a statement condemning racism, if they put out a statement that condemned the attacks, if they put out statements that just showed support, it would change how the media wants to report on that. If they feel like the Queen and the heir and the other heir are also supporting Harry and Meghan and sticking by them, then they're going to be more safe. They're going to be more secure. Instead of having this idea of uniting together and being stronger as a family unit, instead, they're being conditioned to believe that the way to do it is to separate off into these different press units and divide and conquer and fight amongst each other like it's the fucking War of the Roses. So then they start to get mad because of the whole Oprah interview. And Harry's basically like, shut the fuck up about Oprah, okay?
But just before that sit-down is set to premiere, Buckingham Palace, in an unprecedented move, opened an investigation into bullying allegations against Meghan.
The timing of the bullying story has even been admitted by the journalist that wrote it, that it was done explicitly because of the Oprah interview.
Harry and Meghan's spokesperson tells us and the Times this: the Duchess is saddened by this latest attack on her character, particularly as someone who has been the target of bullying herself, and is deeply committed to supporting those who have experienced pain and trauma. Let's just call it what it is, a calculated smear campaign based on misleading and harmful misinformation.
So you could tell I was like, oh my gosh, like someone's panicking over there.
We went on Oprah and said things out of our own mouth because we aren't scared to own the words that we want to say and the thoughts that we have and the opinions that we have. We're not afraid to own those in public. But you guys are still saying your opinions and saying the things that you want to say and putting it out in the media, but instead you're being cowards and planting them and claiming that palace sources or royal aides are saying those things when really it's just you. Harry is basically just like, we are not doing anything different than what you guys are doing, except that we have the fucking balls to own the things that we're trying to say. So again, they're going in like all these fucking circles. Harry just realizes like he's waiting for like an explanation, but there is no explanation. Like they are not being rational. There is no rational explanation for how they've treated him or what they're doing to him. So he's like ready to just like walk away from this conversation, but William starts to get heated out again and is basically like, this is all your fault. You should have come and asked for help. You didn't say that you needed help. He was like, remember the Sandringham agreement? Remember when you guys violated that Sandringham agreement by pulling my security and we talked on the phone? That was asking for help. You guys literally broke the agreement and stripped us of security, and I tried to ask for help and you did fuck all. William is like, that was Granny. Take it up with Granny. Again, William pointing the finger at somebody else as if he has no power in the institution. And also, again, elder abuse, right? The Queen is literally almost dead. This is Prince Philip's funeral. She is like a year from death. She's in her 90s. In no universe am I meant to believe that the Queen made this decision to like strip all of their security like all on her own. She is working off of like what the aides and courtiers and other members of the family are directing her to do. So like to blame it on grandma is like so stupid. So they're basically just saying like, Queen, sign whatever and fuck the consequences. She doesn't know what all the consequences are going to be because she's not in a state of mind to fully understand them, right? While he says that, William also grabs Harry by the collar. Also another sign that William is happy to physically abuse and harass other people. William is like trying to get up all in Harry's face and be like, I love you. You don't understand. I just want you to be happy. I love you. He says, quote, Harold, you must listen to me. I just want you to be happy, Harold. I swear on Mummy's life. He stopped. I stopped. Pa stopped. He'd gone there. He'd used the secret code, the universal password. Ever since we were boys, those 3 words were to be used only in times of extreme crisis. On Mummy's life, for nearly 25 years, we'd reserved that soul-crushing vow for times when one of us needed to be heard, to be believed quickly, for times when nothing else would do. It stopped me cold as it was meant to, not because he'd used it, but because it didn't work. I simply didn't believe him, didn't fully trust him, and vice versa. He saw it too. He saw that we were in a place of such hurt and doubt that even those sacred words couldn't set us free. How lost we were, I thought. How far we've strayed. How much damage has been done to our love, our bond, and why. All because a dreadful mob of dweebs and crones and cut-rate criminals and clinically diagnosable sadists along Fleet Street feel the need to get their jollies and plump their profits and work out their personal issues by tormenting one very large, very ancient, very dysfunctional family. Harry basically responds back to William, I really don't think you do. I don't think you want me to be happy. At this point, how could Harry possibly believe that the family members want him to be happy? He can barely believe that they want him to be safe. They've literally put him and his wife in the most unsafe situation possible. So how could he possibly believe that they just want him to be happy? They just want what's best for him. That's clearly not what they actually want. They want Harry to be happy on their terms. To them, they've been conditioned to believe if Harry's just back in the system, if he just follows the rules, if he just follows and obeys what we're telling him to do at all times, then he will be happy. That's the cult mentality. People within cults, if one person is leaving the cult and one person is staying in, oftentimes there's gonna have to be a disconnect, right? Like think about suppressive persons in Scientology or disfellowship as a Jehovah's Witness. Those people might genuinely love each other, right? The person that wants to leave and the person that wants to stay, there might be a genuine love there. But the person still inside the cult, they have been conditioned to believe that happiness equals what the cult is telling you to do. And people that go against what the cult is saying to do must be intrinsically bad or evil, right? That's the idea of like a suppressive person in Scientology, right? That they actively want to cause harm. They are actively doing the devil's work to try to make people within the cult not happy. So that's how the people that are trying to leave and to be happy and to follow their own happiness get blamed as actually not wanting other people to be happy, to be actively ruining other people's happiness. So when William tells him, I just want you to be happy, what he really means is, I think that what the cult is telling us will make you happy. And it just so happens that in that cult system, Charles and William get to have more power in the hierarchy than Harry. So for them, they probably do get a little bit more out of this whole system than Harry does. But they cannot put themselves in his perspective and understand that what the cult is telling them to do is not actually going to lead to Harry's happiness. So Harry saying that he doesn't really think that they want his happiness, I think is totally valid. They don't actually want his happiness. They're not actually listening to what Harry is saying would make him happy or make him safe. Even what could be best for the monarchy in the long run. Like if they actually were a happy, healthy family, that would actually probably do the monarchy some good. They just still believe that the message of what the cult is saying to do, this obey and just stay in your lane and deal with all the abuse, eventually that will lead to happiness. That's what Charles's argument was earlier. Like, look at Grandpa. They abused him all his life, but now he's a national treasure. That somehow will make it all okay. That will bring the true happiness, being a national treasure. But that's dangling a carrot that Harry knows is like never gonna come. And he has to live with like all the traumas of what they've put him through in all of this. Speaking of cults, let's leave with Harry's last thought on the cult. But now I saw that even our finest moments, my best memories, somehow involved death. Our lives were built on death, our brightest days shadowed by it. Looking back, I didn't see spots of time, but dances with death. I saw how we steeped ourselves in it. We christened and crowned, graduated and married, passed out and passed over our beloved's bones. Windsor Castle itself was a tomb, the walls filled with ancestors. The Tower of London was held together with the blood of animals, used by the original builders 1,000 years ago to temper the mortar between the bricks. Outsiders called us a cult, but maybe we were a death cult. And wasn't that a little bit more depraved? Even after laying Grandpa to rest, had we not had our fill? Why were we here, lurking along the edge of that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns? We end with a Shakespeare line there. It's actually a really interesting Shakespeare line to end from. I believe it's from Macbeth. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong right here. Chapter 87 ends with the birth of Lilibet. Harry is now a father of 2 children. He writes, "Gently but firmly, as I'd seen in films, I pulled our precious daughter from that world into this, and cradled her for just a moment, trying to smile at her, to see her, but honestly, I couldn't see anything. I wanted to say, hello. I wanted to say, where have you come from? I wanted to say, is it better there? Is it peaceful? Are you frightened? Don't be. All will be well. I'll keep you safe." Later, after we'd brought her home, after we'd settled into all the new rhythms of a family of 4, Meghan and I were skin to skin, and she said, "I've never been more in love with you than in that moment." Absolutely adorable. It's just a really nice image to end on, that idea of they finally got through all of this. They finally had their second child. They become this little family unit. This has finally solidified their love for each other and keeping each other safe and protected. Just a complete opposite idea of how Harry's family, just in the other chapter, was treating him, where they didn't really want to tell him that they were going to keep him safe. They didn't want to protect him. They didn't say, oh, we love you more now than any other time. They might have thought that their love was unconditional, but their love for him really was conditional on him being this meek, obeying member of the family that put up with all of this abuse to make them look better. But in this moment, we get this scene of what a family and what love is truly supposed to look like. This vow to keep each other safe. This vow that we love each other even through all of the difficult times. That Meghan loves Harry after all that he went through to stick to what he truly believes in. It's a really lovely way to end the book, but the book is not over. Oh no, we are now in the last part of the book, the epilogue. The epilogue starts with Harry and Meghan going to visit Diana's grave and placing a wreath there. It actually, if the book ended on this scene, it would actually be a really, really nice bookend. It shows Harry and Meghan praying to Diana for guidance and clarity in it all, and knowing how Diana has been framed throughout the book as that guiding light for Harry. Diana, they are carrying her with them forever, that they are still sort of asking her spirit to guide them through all of their decisions. I think it's a really lovely note to end the book on, but the Queen died, so they have to address that. September 8th, 2022, Harry gets a call from his father saying that the Queen is in really bad health. He goes to text Willie about how they're gonna get up there to go visit their grandmother. They get literally no response from the family how to get up there.
I asked my brother, I said, what are your plans? How are you and Kate getting up there? And then a couple of hours later, all of the family members that live within the Windsor and Ascot area were jumping on a plane together. A plane with 12, 14, maybe 16 seats.
You were not invited on that plane?
I was not invited.
Then Charles calls them up again, and he tells Harry that he's welcome to come to Balmoral, but he didn't want her coming. her being Meghan. Harry's like, shut your dirty whore mouth. Don't talk about my wife that way. And then suddenly Charles tries to like backtrack and he's like, oh, no. That's not what I'm saying at all. None of the wives are coming. Kate's not coming. Which is, again, still very sus because it's also like the patriarchy of the family is also super, super frustrating, right? The men are always like meeting together of like, this is a man thing. The wives are not invited to go see the queen in her dying moments. It's like, shut the fuck up. Like, just let everybody go visit her. So Harry has to board a commercial plane. He jumps on the plane. He finally gets a text and he sees that while he was on the plane, the queen died. Granny was gone. Pa was king. He gets up to Balmoral. Everybody else has already been with the queen this entire time. On his own, he goes in to say one final goodbye to his grandmother. After he said goodbye to his grandmother, he says he ate dinner with most of his family, but not with Pa, Willie, or Camilla, which is really heartbreaking. Like, he's being fully cut out of their family. They also basically don't offer him any way to get back to London. So Harry has to board a commercial British Airways flight while the rest of the family flies off in their private jet. The last sort of note that he ends with his grandmother is reminiscing about some of the nice times that they had with her, with their children, the last time they were able to go visit her. He writes, "Sweetest children," Granny said, sounding bemused. She'd expected them to be a bit more American, I think. Meaning, in her mind, more rambunctious. He also reminisces about a time where she made like a silly little video for the Invictus Games. He wrote, "People around the world howled and said they never suspected she possessed such a wicked sense of humor, but she did, she always did. That was one of our little secrets. In fact, in every photo of us, whenever we're exchanging a glance, making solid eye contact, it's clear we had secrets." And then the book actually ends with like Harry setting a hummingbird free. And you know what? I will say, that is a fucking cop-out, J.D. Moringer and Prince Harry. That is a shitty ending for the book. That's like the ending of The Color of Friendship, okay? But the rest of the book was so good that I'll give you a pass on it. But yeah, the setting the bird free, okay, that was bullshit, okay? We are done. We are done. We're finally done reading the book. Yes, I really hope that this all recorded properly. We did it. Woo! I'm not gonna go over my overall thoughts about it again because there's fucking hours and hours of my thoughts on the book, okay? All right, we're done. We're officially done. Thank you so much for watching and putting up with all of my rantings and ramblings for the last, like, few months or so on this book. Thank you so much for being interested in my content. More stuff is coming up. I'm off for the summer, so I'm kind of hoping that I can get my ish together a little bit and get this kind of content out faster. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate all of the support for my channel, all of the new growth that I've gotten. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, give it a comment, subscribe. You know the drill. You know how it works out here in YouTube land. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!